This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. There are very few people who are willing to follow the logic of their own worldview to its conclusion, especially when that conclusion is less than savory according to the dominant standards of our society. Very few people have the courage to say what it ultimately means to hold a particular political position, because most political positions, maybe all of them in fact, have at least one highly unattractive implication within them. Recently, a prominent journalist was fired for doing just this, for having the courage to follow through to its end the logic of a very common idea. This is my interview with Kevin Williamson. So I feel like I'm visiting someone in exile. I am in Dallas, Texas, which is a place a nice boy like me shouldn't be in, first of all. And I'm sitting across from maybe one of the worst people in the world. I don't know. I mean, are you?
I was officially worst.
How do you rank?
I was officially worst person in the world back when Keith Olbermann had a show, and he used to do worst person in the world. And I was worst person in the world one night. I was very proud of that. In fact, the night that happened, I was sitting at a bar in Connecticut, and it made a very good impression on a girl in the bar because you're on television. It doesn't matter if someone's calling you the worst person in the world. You must be someone important.
Yeah, and what'd the girl say?
Oh, she was kind of, hey, that's you.
You're a celebrity.
Yeah, something like that.
So did you have a good night?
I had a reasonable night.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, I actually sent Keith Olbermann a card.
Did you?
Yeah. And well, thanks for that. Because that was actually when I first started at National Review, and I wasn't very well known then. So Keith did me a big favor.
Huh. So for those of you who just tuned in, I'm talking to Kevin Williamson, who still writes for the National Review. A few months ago, he sort of left the National Review to take a staff position as was it staff writer?
Yeah.
For the Atlantic, the venerable Atlantic magazine, and was fired shortly thereafter. You want to tell the story so people know what we're talking about? Because believe it or not, there are some people in the world who are not journalism geeks. And
yeah, well, you're right about that. This is such an inside the media story that I hadn't talked to my father during most of the time when this was going on. So I called him like a week and a half or 2 weeks after I got fired, and there'd been articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and of course, National Review and other places. My dad had no idea any of this stuff had happened.
Really?
It's like, so how's the new job treating you? And well, I should check in on that. So yeah, I think I was fired after 3.5 days.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and I wrote several things, but I only published one, which was a thing about, what was it? The Roseanne thing. Is that the one I published?
One piece for the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they canned you.
Yeah, though they were kind of already in the process of canning me at that point. So when Jeff Goldberg, who's the editor of the Atlantic, hired me, I warned him at the time that, the campaign to have me fired will start as soon as you announce that you've hired me. And what happened with Brett Stevens of the Times and, Barry Weiss and people like that is going to be nothing compared to what you get with me. And he kind of, blew it off. He's like, we're not the New York Times, as he put it. We're not the high church of liberalism, the way New York Times is. It's like, well, you're at least Episcopalian.
Yeah, I'd say so.
You're kind of there. So, I've got some pretty non-conforming views on, abortion and transgender issues and things like that. Although what's funny about this is...
well, when you say non-conforming, you mean roughly half the country agrees with you.
Well, I don't know.
Just not the half that controls the media.
I'll find a way to disagree with that half too
Okay.
on some things. But how to put it? I just thought of something smart to say, and then it just went right out of my head, which happens.
Non-conforming views.
Yeah, on those sorts of things. Although, how to put it? The proximate cause of my being fired was some views attributed to me that I don't actually hold, which is punishing abortion with capital punishment. I'm actually against capital punishment, but you sometimes hear this dumb debate that if you pro-lifers really believed in what you're saying, that abortion is murder, then you would, you wouldn't be saying don't punish the mothers in these cases. And because, you're sort of Ross Douthat types. And I like Ross a lot. And Ross is a very fine writer. This isn't, to come down on Ross. But they always have this position of, yes, we think abortion is a crime and we should try to outlaw it. And it's a horrible moral evil, but we shouldn't do anything to sanction women who procure abortions for themselves because they're in a terrible position and yada, yada, yada. And which is true. But I tend to think that women are morally complete beings who are accountable for their actions just like anyone else. Anyway, so in response to someone making this stupid point, I said, it could be hanging for all I care. And let's take that as a talking point. It doesn't change the underlying question of, do we outlaw abortion? Do we treat it as a criminal offense? Do we treat it as a species of homicide? So whether the punishment is a $15 fine, or the punishment is life in prison, or the punishment is exile to Lubbock, Texas, where I'm from, that doesn't change the underlying question. But of course, if it wasn't the abortion stuff, it would have been the trans stuff. If it wasn't the trans stuff, it would have been something else. I remember what I was going to say. What's interesting about this to me is that, my politics are a little weird in that I am a social conservative, but I'm mostly a very, very hardcore libertarian. I'm not really a Murray Rothbard guy, but I'm sort of philosophically kind of a quasi-anarchist, I guess. So politically, like an Eisenhower Republican, but philosophically a little further out there. So what's interesting about that is that everything that's been written about this has been about my social conservatism, which is actually really quite mild. My libertarianism is actually what's really pretty radical. But it's really hard to demonize someone for being too much of a libertarian, right?
They try.
He really, really doesn't want to regulate drugs,
Right. Yeah, none of it made any sense. I mean, as I knew your work, I knew about you. I knew what you had said about this particular issue. I knew what you had said that it was the proximate cause of your firing. None of it made any sense. But but let's make sense of it, though. I mean,
well, a couple of things. I don't want to talk about this too much because it is kind of a tedious story. But plus, I'm going to write some more about it and get paid for it, so that's another issue. But it wasn't really about any of that stuff. And it wasn't about Twitter. The Atlantic is not making decisions based on the opinions of 12 random nobodies on Twitter. It's ABC that fired Roseanne, right? Was it ABC she was on?
I think so.
ABC is not making programming decisions based on angry people on Facebook. That's not how this stuff happens. Sometimes it provides a useful cover, I think. At the Atlantic, it was a small number of staffers, mostly young women, who just did not want me there.
Right.
And refused to accommodate the idea of, sharing a masthead with me. It's funny because I wasn't going to work out of their office. So people would say, well, how are they supposed to share space with this man who believes that abortion is so evil? Well, they don't actually have to because they don't work out of there. So it was a small number of, largely young female staffers, although not exclusively, I suppose, who just were going to be inconsolable on the issue. And so the rest of that stuff sort of provided a pretext, I think. It's funny, when I was hired, David Bradley, who owns the Atlantic, at least he does at the moment. It's in the process of being sold to Laureen Powell, Steve Jobs' widow. So the controversy had already started before my first day at work, which of course it had, and it started as soon as they announced it. And I sat down in David Bradley's office, and he's got this very old-fashioned, old Washington, way around him. He's a gazillionaire finance guy of some sort. I don't really remember what his background is, but I know he went to Sidwell Friends because he even talks like someone who went to Sidwell Friends. And he sat there and he said, Kevin, I want you to know that we are not wavering. And then he pauses for emphasis and says, I am not wavering. He's Walter Cronkite, right? And actually, I met Walter Cronkite once. He was a crank.
Really?
So, but they were wavering pretty quickly, and the wavering got real wavery real quickly, and so think it was on my third day. I was supposed to be at work. I actually went to Washington to work for a while. And the Atlantic, by the way, is based in the Watergate building, which is
it really?
Which is awesome because, when you're a sort of a disreputable, dodgy right winger, kind of skulking around the Watergate building is really a bittersweet experience.
Perfect.
In many ways. So it was the third day I was supposed to be at work. Jeff called me and wanted to meet for coffee and told me not to come into the office that day, and I was fired that afternoon.
Mm-hmm. So you believe that abortion is evil.
Yeah, absolutely.
You believe abortion is, quote, an absolute evil.
Yeah.
You believe, therefore, I take it, that abortion is murder, is homicide.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were pointing out, I think, that, well, if it's murder, as virtually all pro-lifers believe, correct?
I don't want to speak for them all, but that's certainly part of the pro-life rhetoric.
It'd be hard to find a pro-lifer who wouldn't. I mean, that's kind of the point here, right?
Yeah.
They believe it's the killing of a person.
Well, if it's not, then it's ear-piercing, right? If it's not, it has no moral significance.
Yeah, I think your argument's perfect.
Either we're talking about a human life or we're not.
So was it George Orwell who said that clarity is courage? That the making of an argument or finding the logical conclusion of an argument is courageous and necessary? And I think that's what you did, even though I don't think it's murder.
Yeah.
And I'm basically like a radical pro-choice guy, whatever. But like, I have complete respect for that argument that you make. And I think that it needed to be made.
Well, and the other point of it, I made this point in the Washington Post column I wrote about this. The United States is really unusual in its approach to regulating this. So most of the world actually has much more strict abortion laws than we do, including these countries we think of the libertine nations of Western Europe.
You point out France, right?
Yeah. So, my argument was if we adopted, say, the French model, which I don't have my notes here in front of me, but I believe they cut off after 20 weeks unless there's some extraordinary circumstances. That would...
I think it's 12 weeks. I think, there's a radical restriction after, I think, the first trimester, but it's far more restrictive than here.
So, no, you're right. Congress in the United States was thinking about 20. Right?
The main point is that it's much more restrictive there than it is here.
Right. And and they have, some pretty serious sanctions for violating their abortion law. You can go to prison, do real prison time for it. But the reason this particular debate always pushes my buttons is because it's such a dumb and dishonest thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
If you want to talk about the question of what is abortion, how do we think about it morally, or how should we go about sanctioning it as a criminal matter, well, that's an interesting question that you have to get to eventually, but it's also a separate question.
Right.
And but it's just a way to inject a lot of emotion and such into the argument. Well, it's like drugs. So, I'm in favor of legalizing pretty much all drugs. But if the argument were someone says, well, I think at least heroin should be illegal. And I would say, okay, well, I disagree, but do you want to put to death people who have heroin? And that changes the argument to a different argument than the one you're talking about. It's no longer about legalizing heroin. It's about this emotional thing of, how much do we do? And this is actually an interesting question in the sort of broader family law issues because, there are some very difficult questions we have to ask about when do we terminate parental rights for negligent parents?
Yep.
These are all very, kind of emotional questions. And it's difficult to have a conversation about that with people who aren't intellectually honest. And one of the bad things about, the abortion debate for the left is like the tax debate for the right. There's no intellectual honesty there. It is just, completely made up fantasy land. And what's always fun about that is the rhetoric is so predictable. So when you say something, you take a pro-life position on something, people immediately denounce you as a religious fanatic. And of course, I've had my views on abortion longer than I've had any religious views. But it's always fun with Charlie Cook at National Review, with whom I did a podcast for a while. And so Charles is a pro-lifer, as I am too, but he's also an atheist. And so occasionally he'll get these people, you're just another, crazy Taliban Christian religious fanatic. And of course, Charles, he's this Englishman who went to Oxford and has this very polite way of speaking. He's, well, not actually. And I can't really do Charles' voice, sorry. But so there's a tremendous amount of intellectual dishonesty in that. And so I was trying to, in my clumsy way, illustrate that. And what I did was illustrate it too well because I put a finger right on that emotional thing that drives people nuts. And that's all that remained of the conversation.
Yeah. I think intellectual dishonesty is the defining characteristic of the modern American left. However,
not to be Mr. Both sides and bipartisan.
However,
I think it's the defining characteristic of modern American politics.
Yes, well, but I think the left is right now, hasn't always been, but right now it's the worst.
Yeah, because
culprit,
they ran out of ideas.
Yes,
right?
they're extremely dumb now.
The right still has ideas.
And the left they weren't always dumb. They weren't always this dumb, but now they're really dumb. But but actually on this, I'm not sure. How is the left dishonest on abortion?
By resurrecting the medieval doctrine of ensoulment. So there's this rhetoric on the left that at some point, this thing that's in the womb is a meaningless lump of cells that getting rid of it's just like getting your ears pierced or your appendix out. And then at some point it becomes a human being.
Right.
And there's some, magical thing that happens between these two things. So the intellectual dishonesty of the left is that, the left always postures as being secular and scientific and all that. But on the matter of abortion, it's the left that has withdrawn and taken retreat into metaphysics. Their argument about personhood is just a way of not talking about biology, which is that this is a living, individual, distinct human organism at its earliest stage of development. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe each one of those, criteria don't mean much to you. There's certainly an argument you can make for it. I mean, there are people on the left who accept those things and are still pro-abortion. Camille Paglia is one of those. Mm-hmm. That she just takes a kind of radical view of women's power that that you have control over this, and this is your decision just by nature of your being a woman. I don't think it's actually a good argument, but it's a more honest argument. Mm-hmm. But what you have on the left largely is this funny retreat into metaphysics and away from the biological facts of the case. And I think the biological facts of the case are strong enough to be dispositive. I've never... I became a Roman Catholic relatively late in life. I'm a convert. After I was living in India, oddly enough, I came back and converted to Catholicism. I kind of went the opposite way of a lot of people who, go to the East. They normally come back and start wearing saffron robes and stuff.
Like the Beatles,
and, yeah. I saw Ravi Shankar in Lubbock, Texas, but I didn't go through my hanging out with Ravi Shankar phase like George Harrison did. Uh-huh. But I've never made a religious argument against abortion in my life because I don't think the religious argument's actually very strong. The religious argument's pretty strong for people who already share your religious views, but if people already share your religious views, then you don't need to make the additional argument about abortion with them, except for, there's a few, pro-choice Catholics out there who maybe need to be reminded of some things. But the best argument for abortion has nothing to do with any of that stuff, and you can completely avoid all the metaphysical questions entirely.
Still not tracking your argument here. So did you use the term ensoulment?
Yeah.
And you accuse the left of doing that in the abortion debate, but I see them as doing just the opposite, right? As you said, to them, it's just a collection of cells until it is out of the womb, basically, right?
Well,
and then they put a soul in the thing.
Actually, if you look at...
Isn't that the left discourse on abortion?
Yes and no.
Okay.
There are some people who are, rhetorically at least, extremist enough on the issue to... say, yes, 5 minutes before it's born, it's a lump of cells. 5 minutes later, it's a human being. Mm-hmm. That is a pretty clearly difficult to defend argument. So most people on the left, except for people who are, kind of professionally obliged not to, will accept some restrictions on abortions, especially late in the pregnancy, the idea that this is a person. So there's the idea that personhood descends upon this lump of cells.
Okay, and there's the contradiction.
Right. So, in the Middle Ages, there was this doctrine called ensoulment, quickening. And it still survives in Islamic law, which is an interesting point of comparison. So the idea was that for the first several months of pregnancy, that the fetus was not a person because it wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything. And then the sort of superstitious version of Christianity at the time held that magically down from heaven comes the soul, and then it's a person at that point. The left is essentially making that same argument.
I see. But
pretending like it's not a religious argument.
I see. There's a magical moment for the left.
Pretending like it's not a metaphysical argument. Gotcha. Oh, one of the things, this got cut out of my Washington Post column on this for reasons of room, I'm sure, nothing else. But often those of us who hold this view are compared to Islamic extremists. They call us the Taliban Christians and that sort of thing. Islamic law is actually very liberal on the question of abortion. Islamic law is considerably more liberal on the question of abortion than say, Catholic teaching is. They just have a different understanding of it, and they still sort of stick to this doctrine of ensoulment. I don't think they call it that in Islamic law, but you know, that there's some point later in the pregnancy where this thing becomes metaphysically important in some way.
But aren't you invoking the idea of ensoulment as well? I mean, in other words...
No, I'm not. I'm saying that you have a distinct individual living human organism.
At what point?
From conception on. That's
conception.
What it is. So from the moment, you know, new DNA appears, you've got a new organism there. It's not a tumor. It's not a fingernail. It's not an organ. It's not a part of a different organism. It's not a rutabaga. You do the Sherlock Holmes thing and, you know, eliminate everything it's not, and you're left with what it is. This is what a human being looks like at that stage of development. And there's no magical...
From conception.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's nothing that happens at some point in the pregnancy that changes the nature of this thing biologically. It follows the normal course of human development. And that's, you know, why it's important that it is. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't care about abortion at all. So for instance, this often comes up on kicking stuff there, making a little noise, on arguments about trans issues, which is something I've written about a lot, and also it's been sort of controversial. So being a libertarian, I don't care what anyone does to their own body.
Right.
But it's literally their own body. In the case of abortion, you've got two bodies there by my count, which is what makes it a complicated issue. So I don't necessarily accept a lot of the received dogma about trans people and what that means to be that. But as far as, you know, if someone wants to alter themselves surgically or take hormones or do something like that, consenting adults, right? I don't care. Well, I'm not going to say I don't care, but because I think it's maybe an unhealthy thing to do. But I certainly wouldn't legally forbid it the way I would certainly legally forbid abortion if I had the power to do it.
Yeah, we'll get to the trans thing again. That was the one thing you wrote that I had a visceral negative reaction to. Not that I, you know, it doesn't. I don't really care, but we'll get to that in a second. But I just want to get. I want to get.
That was
really,
the time I got fired for something I read.
Yeah, I want to get really precise about this abortion thing because I've been more and more curious about it, in large part because of you and, in fact, people at the National Review who've written about it, because you're about the only people who write about it intelligently. So it seems to me that there's all these arbitrary choices, right, as to when this thing is a human being, right? So you may not think it's arbitrary, but to me, I don't really see a way you can prove any of these claims. I don't see how you can prove your claim. I don't see how you can prove the radical left-wing claim that it's not a human being. Yeah, right.
Prove it to what standard?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're saying that I'm going to establish a metaphysical standard of meaningfulness, personhood, which is, I'm making air quotes here on an audio podcast. Yeah, you're right. So, anytime you're talking about things that reduce to metaphysical claims, there's no way to end the argument dispositively. This is why, Wittgenstein and some other philosophers took the view that metaphysics was in fact a dead end, because you're talking about things for which there is by definition no evidence.
It's just, to me, it's an open end, right? It's always open.
Well, but it's intellectually it's
unprovable.
Right. So,
yeah.
I mean, the classic argument about this is God, right? So if God is a metaphysical construct outside of the realm of the familiar universe that is perceivable through our senses and knowable through science and that sort of thing, then you don't expect to see any evidence for or against the existence of such an entity.
Right.
So to have a debate over it is pointless because there is no evidence to bring to the debate.
Exactly. My position. Yes.
So there are people
on God. Yes.
Yeah. So there are people who, believe very strongly one way or the other, but this is not something that's based on anything that would hold up to a rigorous intellectual standard, I don't think.
Okay.
And I say this as a Catholic.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just curious here. I'm just really interested. So, I mean, to me, it's silly on one hand for the left to say, well, at 12 weeks or 20 weeks or however, I mean, each person has their cutoff point, right? When it becomes murder, it's sort of like the age of consent laws, right? It's like there's this moment that we choose, each of us,
right,
or as a society, when the thing becomes no longer okay. So if there's a moment, right, in time when the thing goes from being perfectly fine to being murder or rape,
right,
or incest or whatever it is, right?
It's amazing how fast social opinions can change.
Yeah. So for pro-lifers, most of them, I think, and certainly you, it's at the moment of conception. It becomes a human being, and therefore abortion at any time is murder, is homicide. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then for the left, people who are pro-choice, some of them choose, 12 weeks or 20 weeks or whatever. Some of them choose, the third trimester. Some of them even say right up to the moment it comes out of the womb. It's
Peter Singer's not so sure about 2-year-olds.
You can kill it. Yeah, right. That's right. And some people say even after that, even after birth. But I guess I just don't see any way to establish any of these arguments in a way that's conclusive to me.
Well, I think you can establish the facts that I've asserted on those points.
Yes. Right. Meaning that everybody within the debate would agree on those facts.
Everyone is being honest, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I agree with that.
In terms of finding some moral significance in that, then you're right. That's a jump.
Yeah. To me, these are all articles of faith. Actually, each position that's been taken on abortion to me is an article of faith. I don't really see a way.
Yeah, well, I think you would look at it maybe this way: is that you're talking about the moment of conception forward and looking for that moment. Try working the other way, right? So we all tend to agree that there is some moral value to human beings, that human life is worth something. That's why we don't have murder. That's why we don't.
Right.
That's why we punish murder anyway. It's why we don't want to have things like slavery. Why we don't want to have various kinds of exploitation, because we believe that human life is valuable because it's human life. It's it's.
When you say we, you mean dominant cultural norms.
Yeah, pretty universal, more or less all of human civilization for recorded history. Now you can always have the dumb argument. Well, what if I don't believe that? Well, okay, maybe you don't. Fine.
Right.
Then we don't need to talk anymore. That's simple enough.
Right.
So if you want to back that up from there, well, we think, someone who's 18 certainly is a morally significant entity. And we think someone who's 16 is certainly a morally significant entity. There's not any point when you start working that time horizon back where there's some obvious reason to change your mind about whether this entity is morally significant. The question of the second before birth and the second after birth is purely geographic, right? It's a question of position. And if you're willing to take that step, then there's not an obvious bright line to do that. And my contention is that's because there's not a line there at all.
Right.
But not everyone believes that.
Yeah, I think your position is the most consistent of all of them, and it makes the most sense to me. And I guess in a way that's why I respect it the most, even though I think radical pro-choice person. But I absolutely respect that argument. I just think it's not really different than a belief in God. But I get your point about there's a set of facts about the embryo, I suppose, which we, within this realm we would all agree on. But then does that make it a person? I don't know. It seems to me like everyone is doing what the left often does, and the right does somewhat too, but the left certainly does this a lot, is speaking on behalf of the subaltern, those who do not speak, right? The embryo, the fetus, the infant, even the infant, the newborn, they don't speak. We don't know what they think. We don't know what they think, right? They're like animals. We just don't know what's in there. They're like the vast majority of human beings who have ever lived. We simply have no idea what they thought, right? Because there's no record of their ideas, right? So that's, to me, the whole thing is like everybody on all sides of this is speaking on behalf of these things inside of women's bodies. And we just don't know what the thing in there thinks, if it has a soul, a consciousness, nothing really, do we? Can we prove anything about their consciousness? Do they think of themselves as victims? I don't think so.
I don't think it's necessary to answer that question.
Okay.
What I would say.
Okay. Fair enough.
For the same reason that if you had an adult human being who was, say, mentally disabled to the point that they didn't understand what death is.
Right. Right.
We wouldn't say that robs them of their significance as a human being. In fact, we might make the opposite argument that the fact that they're disabled puts special burdens on us as individuals and as a society to do things to take care of them because they can't do that for themselves. And why? Because we do believe that human lives have value, even the lives, or maybe even especially the lives sometimes, of people whose abilities are radically diminished in some way. Right.
I guess what I'm suggesting here is that agnosticism on this question might be the more intellectually coherent way to go, because we simply don't know. In both cases, right? With the fetus and the mentally retarded adult.
I would just argue that what we do know is sufficient.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you that there's just a mountain of intellectual dishonesty on the left about this. And I do think that your position is the most consistent and logical. And that's why I respect it the most. But But again, I do think that I think that pro-lifers tend to do for the fetus what the left tends to do for peasants in the third world. Right?
They're peasants in the first world,
and peasants in the first world too. Yeah, we know what they need, we know what they think, and we are the ones who are going to save them.
Yeah, every now and then I write about these poor, dysfunctional, white, middle of the country, largely southern communities of the sort that I come from, and I write about them in a way that's often unsympathetic. I think we should be honest about what their virtues are, and honest about what their vices are, and honest about what their deficiencies are. And a lot of the criticism I get from that, comes from these sort of, well-meaning liberals who grew up in families that had two married parents who were both college graduates, and both, mom worked in finance and dad was a lawyer, or the other way around, something like that, who've never been so much as downwind of one of these places. Or if they did, they were doing volunteer work and treating it like, an Indian reservation or a Mormon missionary trip to some exotic country or something like that. And they often, I call them the tribunes of the plebs. They elect themselves tribunes of the plebs to, speak on behalf of people who haven't asked them to speak on their behalf.
That's right.
Who know nothing about them.
That's right.
Or know very little about them, and have this, kind of romanticized cartoon view of what those lives are like. And
which is, by the way, it's either cartoonishly bad or cartoonishly good. And,
right.
And noble, right? They're either the noble victims, the working class, the impoverished, or they're rednecks with guns who want to hang women for getting abortions.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
No, I was just thinking, last weekend I drove from Dallas to Amarillo and back in a convertible with the top down, and my redneck is a little less metaphorical than usual right now. It's kind of a little burned right there. So,
right.
Yeah, the redneck thing.
So you're from Lubbock.
Yeah, I grew up in Lubbock.
West Texas. Yeah. And in preparation for this interview, I consulted the map again to remind myself exactly where Lubbock is. I at one point knew exactly.
People always ask me, that's close to Dallas, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Dallas is the nearest big city.
So when you call it up on Google Maps, there, at least on Google Maps, on the first hit, there is nothing near it. Once you zoom in more, you can see some towns.
And they have wonderful names. They have these wonderful literal names like Brownfield and Level Land.
Plano, is that one of them?
No, Plano is a suburb of Dallas here.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah. Plain. Isn't there a plain something there?
Well, the area is known as Llano Estacado, which is Spanish for the staked plains.
Okay. Yeah, but it's west.
The reason it's called that is because when the Spanish explorers were going out there aren't any landmarks or trees or any way to navigate your way out. So they would drive a wooden stake into the ground every so often, like a breadcrumb, to find their way back out.
Yeah. So one of the things I really like about your writing is that, and I said this to you before we started recording, is that you pay attention to class in a way that certainly people on the right don't, but I think even a lot of liberals and leftists don't. And libertarians, I think, are the worst on this. They seem to not be even aware of class, either as an economic or a cultural category, right? They at least rarely invoke it or mention it. But you're very aware of it, and you mentioned your work, your articles about sort of what would be called working class towns, and basically your prescription for those towns is to dissolve them.
Well, some of them, yeah.
And
working class is the wrong word for these places for the most part, because they're mostly defined by the fact that people there don't work very much.
Right.
Which is true across the country. If you look at the top 20% of households by income, they have, on average, more than 2 full-time employed people per household. So that usually means there are 2 employed parents, and then some of them have an adult child who's got a full-time job as well. If you look at the bottom 20%, there's fewer than 1, on average, full-time employed person per household. Maybe 10%. I might be getting these wrong. It might not be the quintiles. But at the extremes, there's a really radical difference in how often people work, how many people have full-time jobs, how many full-time workers there are per household, how likely they are to go some part of the year without working, because in poor communities and poor families, there are a lot of people who do seasonal work, or very, very part-time work, part of the year, that kind of thing. So working class isn't really the right word for them. There are a lot of working class places in the country that are doing quite well, because there's work to be done. Midland, Texas, where everyone's drilling oil out of the ground, or in the Pennsylvania shale, those are working class communities, where working class means you get up in the morning and you put on work boots and you go out into some muddy field and you frack for gas and oil. And those working class communities are doing great.
Or Las Vegas.
Yeah, Las Vegas, which is a different kind of working class community, right? It's a working class place where you can be a guy who valet parks cars and make $70,000 a year.
Right.
Or you can be a really good waiter and make $100,000 a year.
Yep.
Vegas, where I lived for a while, is an interesting, different kind of economy. Vegas is, I like Las Vegas. It's a great place to live. Terrible place to vacation.
Yeah, when you said that to me, I was absolutely shocked. I've always thought of it as basically the worst place in the United States.
No. Well, the Strip kind of is, right? I mean, I don't like casinos and that sort of stuff. Although I do like the Strip in a sense. I like the kind of cheerful, honest vulgarity of it. It's not...
I love that.
It's not fake.
Yeah.
The Strip really is what it is.
Love
and
that.
It's not pretending
honest
to be anything
vulgarity.
else.
It's perfect.
And but outside of that, and the rest where normal life happens in Las Vegas and Henderson and Summerlin and the places around there, it's actually a pretty conservative, middle class to working class place. It's a very inexpensive place to live. I've always thought the thing about Vegas is it's a country as big and diverse and dynamic as ours can afford to have a Las Vegas. You don't want to have a Las Vegas every other town though. And the spread of casino gambling to casino gambling to places like Connecticut and upstate New York, and they built a casino at Valley Forge, for God's sake, and places like that. So you can afford to have a Vegas in our country the same way you can afford to have a New Orleans.
Wait, there's a casino in Valley Forge?
There is, yes.
Do you know what Washington said about gambling?
No, I don't.
But it was the first thing he outlawed among his troops. This is before he was even known. I mean, this is during the French and Indian Wars. I mean, he used to give 50 lashes to his soldiers who drank.
Oh man, I wish
and gambled.
I was writing about that. Yeah. So, places like Mohegan Sun are even more depressing than Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas.
True.
Atlantic City. I wrote a big thing about gambling.
That's the worst place
Atlantic City's
in the United
worst.
States. That's the worst place.
So you can afford to have a Las Vegas. You can afford to have a Hollywood. You can afford to have a Bay Area. You can afford to have Miami, which is its own stretch of weirdness, and New Orleans, which is its own stretch of weirdness. But making those norms for the entirety of the country, I think, is kind of a dangerous thing.
Indeed.
So I'm glad Vegas is there, but I don't want everywhere to be Vegas.
Yeah.
In the same sense that I'm glad that Manhattan is there, and I really like living in New York. When I lived there, it's my favorite city in the world, and it has been for a long time. But you don't want the entire country to be like that, I don't think.
So back to Lubbock.
Yeah, back to Lubbock.
So that's all I know about you and Lubbock is that you're from there. I don't know anything.
Yeah.
So here's a term that the left likes to use, and when I use it among like libertarians and conservatives, they look at me blankly, which is class background.
Class background.
That's like that on the left. Leftists love to use that term all the time. What's your class background, or what's so and so's class? So Kevin Williamson, what's your class background?
Yeah, it would be poor white trash, I think. Is what
poor white trash.
Yeah,
really.
so I didn't actually grow up like in a trailer park, but sort of aesthetically and morally pretty close to a trailer park, although we had a house that didn't have wheels on it. There are trailer parks in Lubbock, but not that many. Real estate's very cheap out there. I think the last mortgage payment on the house I grew up in Lubbock was $285 a year we paid it off. So real estate doesn't cost a lot.
Jesus.
So yeah, I was born to an unmarried teenage girl in Amarillo in 1972. A trimester before Roe was decided, as I sometimes put it. And so adoption was much more common back then because there was an abortion. I was adopted by a couple who were living in Amarillo at the time. I moved to Lubbock shortly after that. So I think I was 10 or 11 months old when we moved to Lubbock. So basically the whole first part of my life was there until I finished high school. They were divorced very shortly after that, when I was really quite young still. They were terribly nice people. I'm sure my dad's not going to listen to the podcast, so I'll just go ahead and say it. But they had been married for almost 20 years at that point. They had a very unhappy marriage, and they were the sort of dumb people who thought, let's have some kids. That'll solve our problems. That'll bring us together. Because everyone knows when you're in a bad relationship, what's going to help is financial stress and lack of sleep.
Absolutely. So they adopted my older brother and I, a couple of kids. Him 2 years before me. He's 2 years older than I am. And so they were divorced when I was maybe around 4. Okay.
My father did not graduate from high school. My mother did. And but she, at that point, hadn't really worked in a long time, never had any sort of meaningful job. So as you can imagine, the late 1970s, the economy wasn't that great to start with, and entering the job market in a place like Lubbock, where there's not a lot of economic opportunity to start with, unless you work for Texas Tech University, which is the big kind of financial entity in town, or you're a cotton farmer, which is the other big economic enterprise there. Jobs look like retail and service and things like that, which is, she did a lot of that stuff over the years. So we were, quite poor. Poor in the sense of like not having food in the
You were
house.
living with your mother, I take it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And
So my brother and I lived with her. She, she was not good at being single. So she got married a lot, and she had pretty rotten taste in guys. So kind of parade of alcoholics and addicts and various kinds of psychotics, and a great deal of violence in the household and all that kind of stuff. And, a great deal of, obviously, financial instability. And, but eventually, later she went to work as a secretary in the College of Education at Texas Tech University. She worked for the dean of the College of Education, which is probably the best job she ever had in her life. Her husband at that point was a janitor at Coronado High School in Lubbock. He had worked for Pure Later before that, been laid off, never got another good job. So I would guess, adjust for inflation, I graduated from high school in 1991, that their household income was probably still less than $30,000 a year, maybe less than $35,000 a year. But for the year she worked for Tech, there was a measure of stability. And of course, being a government employee, benefits and stuff are really quite nice. So she had good insurance and things like that. So, which made a huge difference, not only to her, but then also to me later in life, because, she got sick and eventually passed away. There weren't a lot of financial burdens associated with that, the way there are for a lot of people. So, like a lot of people who grew up in those circumstances, me not as radically as some, there was a bit of financial schizophrenia there. I didn't see my father much growing up, but, he lived a very different sort of life. He had a pretty good job. He married a woman who was reasonably well off. They had, a kind of, in terms of economic and material terms, a life very, very different from mine. And so sometimes I would go, see this for a week and then, come back and things would be what they were. I had a friend, a really radical case of this, where she, her father was this kind of deadbeat drug addict guy, also growing up in Lubbock. Whereas her parents were very socially prominent, or grandparents rather, were very socially prominent and very wealthy people. And so she spent half of her time in just real poverty, and then the other half of her time, being essentially a debutante. And depending on where the dynamics were in the family. And that's something I've always wanted to write about, that sort of financial schizophrenia, particularly for people who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when divorce was really at its peak.
I'm one of them. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, my mother and stepfather made $11,000 a year combined in the 1970s when I was between 10 and 15 when I was living with them. My father always had like a solid middle-class job working for the Forest Service, had a nice house sort of in the foothills of Berkeley, not rich at all, but very solid, stable middle class, and in a white neighborhood. And my mother and stepfather lived in a mostly black neighborhood, so I know what you're talking about with the schizophrenia and going back and forth between the two all the time. Yeah. I don't know what that did to me, but yeah, I have been among billionaires, and I have been among, living with basically street people, both. I know what it's like on both sides, both ends of that. So, but so of which you speak when you write about the white sub working class, I guess, right?
Yeah, I do know a bit about those people and those people. What do you mean, those people?
So you don't say my people.
My people. Well, because they aren't anymore, right? I mean, they never were in a sense.
Right. They weren't, were they?
From the time I was very young, for whatever reason, partly having to do with the fact that I had really good schools and really good teachers who were able to sort of point me in the right direction from a very, very young age. I sort of understood the things that I needed to do in life to not have that sort of life.
Good schools and good teachers?
Yeah, Lubbock has
So I take
schools.
These were public schools?
Yeah, public schools.
So Kevin, you wrote one of my very favorite arguments against public schools.
Yeah, I would shut them down tomorrow if I could.
Yeah, okay.
I was lucky enough to have really good ones. For the same reason that I think that we pay public employees too much and that their benefits are absurdly inflated, but I was certainly glad my mother had them
right
when she had them. I don't believe in Social Security, but damn if I'm not going to cash those checks if they ever come in. You know,
a public school teacher can be a good teacher.
Of course, yeah. Well, the thing is, there are lots of places in this country that have great public schools. I was the newspaper editor in a place called Lower Merion, Pennsylvania for a while, which is a wealthy, old, blue blood, literally polo playing suburb of Philadelphia.
Kobe Bryant.
Yes, Kobe Bryant's the Lower Merion High School graduate. They still talk about him, and not nicely, as it turns out.
Really?
Yeah. So they've got tremendously wonderful public schools that spend $30,000 a year per student or something like that. For money you could send them to one of the better, private schools in the area for less than we pay to send them to public schools. The fact is that rich, well-educated people are going to get good educations for their kids, whether they're public schools or private schools. And people talk about, well, we don't like the idea of private schools because, there's tuition and that keeps people out and it's, discriminatory on financial grounds. Well, have you shot for real estate in Lower Merion lately? Because, $15,000 a year tuition for a good private school or $20,000 a year tuition for a pretty good private school is a hell of a lot easier to pull off than $2.5 million for a starter house in Gladwin, Pennsylvania or someplace like that.
Right.
So, essentially the people who made all these arguments against things like gated communities and country clubs and private schools set up their own gated communities and country clubs and private schools. They just happen to be incorporated as municipalities.
That's right. So how did a white trash boy get good schools and good teachers in Lubbock, Texas in the 1970s?
Yeah, 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah. Lubbock is a college town.
Texas
Tech University is based there. And Lubbock had, and I suspect still has, a really good magnet program for students. One of the things we're really good at in public education, by the way, and good at in American society in general, is identifying academically talented people when they're young. God bless standardized testing. It's a good way to sort those people out. We're good at cultivating those people. We're good at cultivating people like me who have some academic gifts, maybe some talents that way, who are in family positions or social positions where they're not able to maximize those on their own steam. We're really pretty good at locating those people. What we're not good at is everything else. But so I went into Lubbock's magnet program starting in 7th grade, I guess, and stayed in it through high school. So even though, my own particular immediate family was not, a cabal of Shakespeare scholars by any stretch of the imagination, but my friends were, their parents were professors and doctors and lawyers and professionals and things like that. Okay. So I was surrounded by kids who were, pretty smart, driven. They came from families that were able to, sort of point them in the right direction. There's kind of an osmosis there. So the most valuable thing to a smart and ambitious person is to be around other smart and ambitious people. That's really, how you learn. So things that I didn't know how to do for myself, a lot of times my friends' parents would sort of help me with, although in retrospect, I wish I'd pursued some of that a little more aggressively than I did.
Like what?
I didn't really understand how financial aid worked and things like that, and for college. So I ended up going to the University of Texas instead of Yale.
Another public school. Because
I was just terrified of the $25,000 a year in tuition that Yale was charging at that point, which I'm sure
Did you get into Yale?
Yeah.
Without financial aid? Or
that's a separate application process. And
you just didn't even try?
This gets complicated for various kinds of reasons, but
you would now be a speechwriter for a Democratic politician if you'd gone to Yale.
Yeah, so I just didn't know how that worked, and I was afraid of the idea of student loans and things like that. Now, in retrospect, I know I could have gone to Yale basically for free if I had figured out how to follow that stuff up. But I just didn't, and I was awkward about asking questions. I was, well, to this day, actually, it's one of the reasons I was never that good at business. I'm not good at asking people for money. And it's just something that, I'm always sort of shy about. So anyway.
So UT Austin.
Went to the University of Texas. I was the managing editor of the Daily Texan there.
And what were your politics at that point?
My politics has never changed.
Really?
I've always had essentially the same politics.
So they hated you?
Yeah, largely. Well, long before the thing at the Atlantic happened, I was actually blackballed from the student newspaper. UT has a very goofy thing where the managing editor really kind of runs the newspaper, and the editor-in-chief is elected by the student body the same way the student council president is. It's because the Daily Texan is a private nonprofit corporation.
Which means that you were the managing editor then, right?
I was eventually the managing editor.
You would never be elected by the student body.
Probably. Well,
for anything.
We elected some conservatives, including Jeff Henley, who's a lawyer here in Dallas. Used to be a conservative. His politics have changed as he happens to lawyers a lot. As it turns out, lawyers become less libertarian over the years. Can't imagine why.
I don't know.
But
go figure.
So weirdly enough, in contravention of probably state election law and certainly their own rules, the Texas Democratic Party got involved in a student newspaper editor election at the University of Texas at Austin. And they elected a woman there named Rebecca Stewart, who made it clear that as long as she was editor, I was not going to be working at the newspaper. So I, hey, Becky, took a year off of college.
Another one of those young women you've had problems with.
Yeah, over the years. Been more than one, as it turns out. So, yeah, so that was probably the first time my politics cost me a job. Oh, the trans thing was funny because I got fired by the Chicago, I always forget, was it the Tribune Review or the other Chicago newspaper, Sun-Times? The Chicago Sun-Times, I think, that fired me. And the funny thing was they fired me without me working there. So I wrote this column about Laverne Cox for National Review, and they reprinted it in the Chicago paper.
Titled Laverne Cox is
not
a man.
A woman.
Or not a woman,
yeah.
Right.
And so they published it, as they do sometimes. Some stuff that I would write for National Review sometimes runs in other publications. Dallas Morning News run it a lot, that sort of thing. And I didn't even know it was there. And so there's this tremendous social media outcry, and there's a petition and all that. And so eventually they put out a statement that they were retracting the column and severing their relationship with
the Sun-Times? Isn't the Sun-Times the conservative paper in Chicago?
I may be wrong. Maybe the Tribune Review. I'm sorry. I think
so. I think the Sun-Times is the Republican paper.
Right, you're right. It was the Tribune.
And the Trib is the Democratic paper.
Yeah. And so, and they put out a statement that they were severing their relationship with me. I was like, guys, you don't have a relationship with me. You can't fire me. I don't work there.
Doesn't matter to them. They have virtue to signal.
Right.
They're very busy with that.
So there was a lot of crowing by these, internet activists that, we got him fired from the Sun-Times.
Right on, comrades.
And I was like, could I at least get my $40 reprint fee first, or whatever they pay. So, this sort of thing has come up from time to time in my career. Oh, what's funny was, until I went to work for National Review, I was just a regular newspaper editor. I did write an opinion column from time to time, but I was mostly management and editing. So I ran newspapers for many years. And
you're talking about like local, you worked for like the Lubbock paper or the Amarillo paper?
Yeah, I worked for the Lubbock paper for a while. I was the editor of suburban newspaper outside of Philadelphia in Lower Merion for 7 or 8 years, I guess. Then I started a daily newspaper in Philadelphia itself sometime after that.
So after UT, this is what you did for quite a while.
Well, I went to India first. Worked for a newspaper in India for a while.
How'd that happen?
I had a good friend in college whose family lived in Bombay. And it's typical way things actually happen in life. They knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy sort of thing.
Yeah.
So my friend was asking me what I was going to do after college. And I said, I don't know, I'll go work for the Austin American-Statesman or something. And he said, you think about coming to India and working for one of our papers. So that was tremendously fun. So I didn't know a damn thing about India really when I got there. Yeah. I knew I liked Indian food, and my date to my senior prom in high school had been an Indian American girl. That's all I knew about India, and which wasn't very much because, girls of Indian background born and raised in Lubbock, Texas don't really have a lot to tell you about India, as it turns out. So
how long were you there?
Between a year and a half.
Did you see a lynching in India?
I did, yes. Well, the aftermath of one, anyway. Daily newspapers, as you probably know, you tend to work late at night. And so I would get home from work between 2 and 3 in the morning, typically. And the newspaper had a van that would take us home. And when we got to my apartment building there in what was then the outskirts of Delhi, which Delhi has grown a lot since then, so it's a bit more central, I guess. There was a kid who had been strung up, from a utility pole, lamppost. So there was a little slum that ran right up next to the building I lived in. So, these sort of makeshift homes, tar paper and debris and stuff that, Indian slums are made out of. And he had been hanged, and we were the ones who found him. So my understanding is that this was a Hindu-Muslim religious or romantic relationship, which was then, and I assume now, still a big thing, but certainly a bigger thing among people outside of the wealthy, educated, liberal elites of India. Well, in fact, when I ran an internship program, essentially at the newspaper I worked at, and among other things, and there was a Hindu intern and a Muslim intern who started dating, and I didn't care at all, of course, because I don't care about anyone's dating life, but it was a big issue, where their parents got involved with calling the newspaper and wanting to talk to their supervisors and how do we stop this from happening and that sort of thing. So that aspect of life in India was quite interesting. Although, again, I'm talking about India in 1996, 1997. Things have changed a lot since then. But people talk about privilege and white privilege and that sort of thing. If I ever experienced it, it was certainly there, in the sense that walking around as a white guy with blonde hair. I used to have hair and it was blonde. Is like it's a weird thing in India at that time. You go to the front of every line essentially, and all doors are open, that sort of thing. You're immediately considered a person of presumably high status, even if you're kind of a nobody with no money like I was at the time. Let's think about the United States, and here's one of the things I like about America. We are kind of vulgar. We are Donald Trump's country in a lot of ways, and I do write about class a lot, and class does matter here, but much more meaningful than class here is just money. And money is kind of fair and democratic in many ways. You can earn more money. You can't change where you came from. You can't change your IQ. As hard as you want to work, your IQ is going to be what it is the rest of your life, and that's going to be a huge determinant, much more than how much money your parents had. But we're pretty upfrontly honest about money as status. You can be a high school dropout. If you're a billionaire, you're still a billionaire. You're still that guy. And now there's some, gradations within that world.
Well, I'm just thinking that Trump sort of disproves your thesis there, doesn't he? I mean,
because he's an Ivy League guy and all that stuff.
Because he's not. He is and he's not, right? He's sort of the working class capitalist, right? So culturally, he reads very much as a working class guy. And that's, I think, what drives the left mostly crazy about him.
Well, yes, I think
because his taste is so bad.
Right, yeah.
Because he's so Las Vegas, so Atlantic City, so gold, so gilded, so hip hop.
Or since Caligula, as I said. Well, he used to be popular in hip hop, right?
I have said this a long time. He's the first black president.
Yeah. I don't know that I would go that far. But Trump was never really outside of the New York, Manhattan elite consensus until he got into politics. I mean, he was kind of a clown in some ways. He was a figure of fun.
I think they've always hated him though. Or at least disowned. They've never he's always been outside. He's the only one who would show you what his plane looked like, what his apartment looked like, right?
He was distinctive in that way, but he was never exiled from it. They may have laughed at him, but he was still invited to all the parties, right?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
It was when he got into politics that he really became a hate figure,
right?
And there were various reasons for that. But of course, that's when he started to figure out what his political ideas were when he ran for president.
But it would have been mortifying for any of the Manhattan elite to be associated with him closely.
I'm not sure that's actually entirely true.
I'm pretty sure. I knew
and certainly not true of, say, Ivanka and the extended family. So, and even living in Trump buildings had some cachet at some point, although I can't really imagine why. I think Keith Olbermann, since he came up here, I think he lived in a Trump building, didn't he? Didn't he live at one of the Trump towers?
Huh.
But yeah, we have money.
Right.
And money kind of is our real substitute for class. Class matters still in the United States. Where you're from matters, but it doesn't matter the way it matters, say, in England. Or what school you went to, what your accent sounds like is a very, very important thing. And no matter how much money you ever make in your life or anything you do, you're still that kid.
I mean, I generally agree with you. I do think it matters, and I think Trump is the great example of this. I think that he doesn't have the proper credentials, characteristics of his class, and I think that's why he's had the hardest time ever as a president, right? And he's considered to be fundamentally
think he's had a hard time as a president?
Illegitimate. Don't you? I mean, isn't this sort of?
I think he's having fun.
I mean, in terms of the attacks, I mean, he's like virtually the entire media establishment, including much of the conservative media establishment, including National Review and Kevin Williamson, have been hating his guts from the get-go.
Well, I suppose, although
he's certainly the most hated president of all time.
I don't know about that.
Who's think even close?
Nixon at the end.
Okay. I'll give you that one. The very end of Nixon's career.
Well, in terms of the elites, and I'm always suspicious in the use of that term, but the elites in the true sense, Reagan was just despised.
Not like this.
Remember what was the puppet show in the 80s, the political puppet
Oh, we
show?
hated him for sure, but not like
Yeah.
Trump. With Trump, it is a different mania. This is a mania.
I'm not sure I believe that entirely.
Okay.
Reagan was routinely, written off as a Nazi, or written off as being mentally defective, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, the moment you're in always seems like the most important moment in history. Yeah. My least popular opinion actually is this, that I don't think we actually live in very interesting times. I don't think 100 years from now, people are going to look back on these years as being particularly eventful. They're going to remember 9/11 because that changed our relationship with the wider world. They'll remember Barack Obama being elected as the first African American. Mm-hmm. They'll remember Donald Trump being elected as a populist from outside of the normal political system that announced what I think will be a fundamental change in presidential politics following him. That populism's here to stay for a long time, irrespective of whether it's right-wing populism with Trump.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering how the next sort of standard issue president speaks.
Yeah, well, what's funny is, so right now the left is having a good laugh, right? You've got Trump. Look at you idiots. You deserve it. And they're having a good laugh right now. But they should be maybe a little more circumspect about that, because it's not as though some left-wing celebrity couldn't come and do the same thing much more effectively on the left. Really, Cynthia Nixon? She's a fine actress. I saw her in Wit. Mm-hmm. She was terrific.
Oh, yeah.
Liked her a lot. I'm not sure I see her, as a major civic leader in America. Although one of the things I said about the 2016 election is that it should have been a New York mayor's race, right? Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton should have been a race for mayor of New York City.
Exactly.
They both were qualified for that job. Both of them might have done a good job at it. Either one of them might have done a good job at it. Neither one of them had any business being president of the United States of America. So it's not as though, some Sean Penn type figure, although Sean Penn's maybe a little expired at this point, couldn't step in on the left and suck up all that Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren energy, add some celebrity to it,
sure,
and run with it, especially if it was someone who wasn't a white guy. Mm-hmm. If it was a female celebrity, an African-American celebrity, a Latino celebrity, could certainly come in and do that. So the left's having a good laugh right now and fine. I haven't been a Republican since 2006, I want to say, is when I left the Republican Party. I left over Arlen Specter, which in retrospect just is quaint.
He was a Democrat.
He eventually became one. He's still a Republican back then.
But for all intents and purposes, he was a Democrat. And that's why you left, right? That's because he was a liberal.
Well, he was self-interested is what he was.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed by the way that Bush and Santorum and the rest of these guys carried him across the finish line against Toomey. That was 2006, wasn't it?
I have no idea. I remember vaguely.
Would have been right around then.
Yeah.
And so I just gave it up at that point because I decided I didn't think they actually believed in anything, so there's no point in being a member of that. So that being said, so I don't have any particular, love for the Republican Party institutionally at the moment, but the Democrats are having a good laugh at the Republicans right now, and the Republicans certainly have it coming. The Republican Party has done a lot of dumb things and a lot of corrupt things over the last 10, 15 years that they certainly deserve to be punished for, both at the national level and at the state party level and some other places. But, the Democrats are going to have their turn on the dunking booth, too.
Yeah. So you wrote an entire book called The Case Against Trump.
It was a short book. But, yeah, I did write it.
It's still an entire book.
It was.
On this. So
an ineffective book, as it turns out.
I was going to ask you, even though you wrote a whole book, what was your... So the National Review sort of famously came out against Trump. They were among the original...
Oddly enough, I wasn't asked to write for that edition.
Never Trumpers. Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a move I didn't love about the National... I'm not pro-Trump, but I'm sort of anti-Trump and always have been. And I wish you guys had been a little more on my side of this. But what's your... summarize your case against Trump. Why do you oppose the guy? And have you changed your mind about him at all since he's taken office?
No.
Because you wrote that in 2015, right?
I wrote it during the primaries.
Yeah.
It's funny. So Roger Kimball...
Very early, yeah.
Yeah, he was the publisher of Encounter Books and also the publisher of The New Criterion, where I was the theater critic for some years. So Roger asked me to write this, and then he called me up a couple of days later. He said, well, maybe you shouldn't, because surely he's not going to be in the race long enough to justify us finishing this up. And so I said, Roger, tell you what, I'll knock it out real quick and give you the manuscript. And if he drops out, then bygones, we'll just call it a day and that'll be fine. I won't get too upset about it. And so it turns out, of course, he made it through the primaries and eventually became president. I just would say that he's, just grossly unqualified in every way for the job. He is intellectually unqualified for it. He's morally unqualified for it. There's nothing in his professional experience that suggests he was prepared for it. I'm not one of these people who think you have to, sort of have an entry-level job in politics and work your way up. I mean, one of my favorite presidents, maybe my favorite president, was Eisenhower. Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower's first job in politics was president. Now, granted, being a general in World War II was a political job as well, and he was doing some hand-holding, but he did a number of things in the course of his career that would make you say, okay, well, we can trust this guy to run this administrative thing. And it's one of the things I hate about modern politics is the cult of the presidency, that he's the national embodiment, right. That he's some sort of democratic monarch. Right. This makes me want to puke. I hate the State of the Union. I hate all the pomp and circumstance. I would abolish all that stuff tomorrow if I could. I like Switzerland, where, the president takes the subway to work.
Oh, I don't know that.
No one in Switzerland ever knows who the president is.
Really?
So, Switzerland's a little weird. They have a 7-person executive, and the technical presidency rotates between those 7 people. But whoever the chief executive of Switzerland is at any given time flies commercial a lot. Wow. And takes public transit.
I got to say, as nation states go, Switzerland, not bad.
I wrote a piece for National Review called The Helvetica Type, because I'm a type nerd and I make jokes like that, about Swiss governance based on spending some time there. I love Switzerland. It's my favorite place to go outside of the United States. And there's a lot to admire about their system. I was thinking about this when we were talking about abortion earlier, because one of the really useful things about the Swiss model that we are really losing, and it's going to be difficult to rebuild, is they understand the value of consensus. So because of the way the Swiss government is structured, making any major radical policy change at the national level requires very, very broad buy-in. If you don't have the support of 75 to 80% of the population, it's just not going to get done. They have this weird combination of radically local government and radically democratic government, and this strange sort of national government. One of my favorite things about them is that the final say on immigration decisions isn't made by the national government; it's made by your local government. So if you want to settle in Zurich, you have to go present yourself to the Zurich City Council, essentially your local canton, and convince them that you should be allowed to stay. I happened to be there when Tina Turner was becoming nationalized as a Swiss citizen. And she had to trundle down to the canton, committee meeting and prove to them she could speak German. She was living in a German-speaking part of Switzerland outside of Zurich. And, prove that she was financially stable. She could take care of herself, that she had health insurance and that kind of stuff. And it's your local, basically your city council that makes that decision. So we don't have that kind of consensus model of politics anymore. Our politics are increasingly polarized because that's in some ways the nature of mass democracy. Because people can't get their heads around the issues, right? So economists talk about rational ignorance, that if you really wanted to study up on, say, tax policy, it takes a tremendous amount of work to do that. And then maybe you want to study up on Turkey and our relationship with Turkey or our relationship with North Korea. And there's not enough time in the day for an employed person with a normal life to really master all these issues. So in America, the politics becomes purely tribal, right? We're these people, they're those people. And we may not like our guys. The conservatives hate the Republican Party. That's what the whole Tea Party movement was about, was looking for a conservative alternative to the Republican establishment. That's what Trump is about. The Democrats, the left hates the Democratic Party too. They think of them as corporate, moderate, sellouts, too accommodationist, insufficiently confrontational. There was a letter to the editor in Harper's, I guess, in the last issue. Their lead letter was from some local Democrat saying, the problem with this country is the Democrats are too accommodating and they weren't hard enough on Trump. And I was like, well, I don't think that their graciousness in defeat was really what's wrong with the country. But okay, your mileage may vary. So all we have is tribalism. So we don't like our guys even so much, but we hate those other guys. We don't like Trump maybe, but gosh, he's not Hillary. And well, we don't like Hillary so much, but God, she's not Trump. And that sort of thing, once you get to that point in a country of our size and our geographic spread and our diversity and our dynamic society and economy, I think it's really hard to come back from that. It's hard to go back to, a sort of Eisenhower consensus-driven model of politics. But of course, I worked for National Review for a long time, which was more or less founded in opposition to Eisenhower-style republicanism.
So Yeah, a democratic entity of 10 people requires tremendous amount of work for each person involved, right?
Yeah.
Democracy, my big argument about democracy is that it's just too much damn work. I'm not interested, right? As you were saying, it requires an incredible amount of studying before you've even made decisions for everyone. If it's a true democracy, right?
Right. Which is why you don't want one of those.
Exactly. And so
a republic.
Even for 5 people, it's just a ton of work. But in a nation of 350 million people, it requires the kind of idiotic tribalism, right? Reflexive tribalism that you're talking about. I agree with you. Yeah.
Oddly enough, what kept it in check for us for a long time was the thing that is now held in most contempt, which is the smoke-filled room. Is the party establishments exercising control over the primary process and also over some other aspects of politics, where they would just take a populist demagogue like Trump and say, well, you're just not in the party. And you're not going to be the nominee because you're not going to be on the ballot, and that's that. So properly understood in the American context, democracy is not our form of government. It's an aspect of our form of government.
Right.
And democracy in its place is a wonderful thing. Again, Switzerland's a good example of that. Democracy in choosing your elected representatives, those sorts of things, that is good and useful. And having a broadly small d democratic political culture also, I think, is broadly speaking a good thing, although you can have too much of it. But having sort of mass democracy where you're taking every complicated issue there is, bundling them together. One bundle is red bundle, one bundle is blue bundle, and you get to choose between red and blue. And people are choosing that based on really cultural identity more than anything else. And we can't disaggregate these things. Then that becomes a real problem, because I don't think government ultimately is all that important, but you do need it to do some things, and it can do a lot of damage. And we are at a very, very dangerous point, I think, where our government can't do the things that it's supposed to do. The federal government just fails on lots of basic things. I mean, irrespective of how you feel about, say, illegal immigration, you want to have a country that can control its borders. Even if you think that there should be lots more immigration, that's one of the things a national government does. It should be able to tell you how many federal programs there are, and it can't. It should be able to conduct a reasonably sound fiscal policy, do those sorts of things. So as it loses its ability to do the things it's supposed to do, it becomes more vicious and intrusive about everything else, which is where you get things like TSA. So TSA has something like a 65% failure rate in the red shirt drills, as they call them, where they send people through with guns.
I think it's worse than that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I know one of the airports had like an 80% failure or something. Yeah. But, they will, get right up your digestive system if you've got a belt buckle on or something. So they become petty and vicious and totalitarian in the enforcement of small things involving law-abiding citizens. And that's the interesting thing about it. If you look at the way we handle, say, gun regulation, every left-wing, every democratic progressive proposal on what to do about guns, almost every one of them is focused on licensed gun dealers and the people who do business with them, who commit essentially no crimes.
Yeah, they want to punish you, not the criminals.
But why does ATF like this model? Because ATF does like this model. Well, because it's easy to police a licensed gun dealer. They've got business hours. They've got fixed addresses. They keep records. They've got a license that they want to keep up to date. So they bring information to you. Whereas chasing a guy through some crap neighborhood in Chicago or Houston who is a straw buyer, who's got a gun that he's not supposed to have, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of police work for no real payoff, right? Because no one's career gets made because they busted some, gangster's grandmother for being the clean face on a straw buyer purchase.
And that's where the ATF and liberal politics help each other, right? Because liberals want to attack, as I said, law-abiding gun owners, and they want to not attack the kids in Chicago.
Because America's first and best line of defense is an $8 an hour sporting goods clerk.
Yeah. Sporting
goods store clerk. Man, I can't talk.
Right.
Yeah, this is a deeply silly way of looking at things. So something I've written about for years now, and I've been hammering on it. And Jeff Sessions actually is getting better about this. And I'll say this in favor of Jeff Sessions. I don't have much good to say about him, but say this. The federal government, U.S. attorneys, would not prosecute straw buyer cases. The one in Chicago, as a matter of publicly stated policy, would not prosecute a straw buyer case unless it was part of a larger organized crime syndicate or a larger gun smuggling operation. So if you're someone who goes in, does a straw purchase in Chicago, ATF figures it out, your chances of being prosecuted were essentially zero. They wouldn't go after those cases. And because nobody's career gets made for busting these people, right? Because they're small fry, and it's a lot of work. Whereas, I got, a $10 million fine from a sporting goods chain for doing X, Y, or Z wrong in their paperwork is a big deal, and you get advanced for that. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. We'll do this totalitarian stuff on the stuff that doesn't really matter, and we completely abandon our responsibilities on the stuff that does. Sam Francis, who is a difficult person to talk about because he became a racist kook later in life, but he left us with a really good term for this. He called it anarcho-tyranny. And that really is what you get in sort of mass democracies gone amok, like where we are. Now, I'm not apocalyptic, and I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I don't think we're beyond recovery by any stretch of the imagination. But if we do continue along the same path, if the current trends do continue, then that's where you go, and that ends up being very ugly. And of course, I saw a good deal of that in India, where you have a very powerful national government that does nothing for most people, but certainly is good at extortion and bribery, and log rolling and favoritism and those sorts of things.
Can I go back to Lubbock?
Oh, please, yes. Let's.
So
it's only 6.5 hours away, 7 hours.
Yeah, let's go. Get in the car. Or we probably have to fly, don't we?
It's a nice drive.
Is it? Is it really? No, it's not. It's a terrible drive, right?
Well, there's not much to see.
Yeah. Oh, so what's nice about it?
There's not a lot of traffic. You can drive.
You can listen to podcasts while you're doing it.
You can listen to podcasts.
You can listen to a lot of podcasts from here to Lubbock.
And we take the convertible, you get a good tan.
Oh, okay. I'm into that. I can become an instant redneck.
Yeah.
At least in one way.
You look like you would burn. You've got that kind
of.
Oh,
yeah. No, I mean, I'm genetically completely, well, half my family's all rednecks from North Carolina, but yeah.
So about Lubbock.
Was that?
About Lubbock.
Yeah. You said that your politics have always been the politics that you have now.
Yeah, I would say essentially always libertarian politics.
Well, whatever they are, that they have basically remained unchanged, you've said. Okay. So that is curious to me. I'm just wondering, right, being from Lubbock, being raised by a mom who, did you say she graduated from high school or did not?
She did, yeah, she did.
But she did not go to college.
No.
And I take it she wasn't reading a whole bunch of Edmund Burke.
She was not.
And so
she watched a lot of Wheel of Fortune.
So, but someone else was, and that was you. I know you had these magnet friends, but they didn't probably become conservative intellectuals, right? You did, or maybe they did. I don't know.
Some of them did. Yeah.
Well, this is the question: like, how on earth did Edmund Burke and Hayek and all these people get into your and Russell Kirk, I imagine, get into your head?
Yeah, well, National Review was a big part of that.
Okay.
So,
how'd you find it?
It's my school library.
Yeah.
Which I suspect that was some National Review reader. A lot of our readers and donors will get subscriptions for all their local libraries.
Yep.
If the libraries don't get them.
Smart.
God bless those people. And a good way to, move the message out. So I came across Bill Buckley on Firing Line, of course, as many people did. And I didn't really even understand his politics, I think, at first. I just thought he was an interesting,
so you're a kid. You're talking about, you're a kid, you're watching PBS.
Yeah, 13, 14.
And Firing Line comes on.
Yeah.
Great show.
Yeah, it was great.
One of the greatest shows of all time.
So I was in 8th grade, I remember, when I discovered National Review and started reading it. Although, at first I think I read National Review more as a literary exercise.
Yeah,
I liked
the
way it was written.
Me too.
It was interesting. I didn't understand some of the political disputes, I think.
Right.
I was like when I first started reading the New Criterion, where people had these very, very strong opinions about individuals and subjects I'd never heard of and didn't know. So, Clem Greenberg, we got to feel very strongly.
Do you remember? Do you remember what caused you to pick up that copy of National Review in that library?
Oh, it was suggested to me by a librarian who was not conservative. I knew him later in life.
So why do you think that happened? What did they see in you?
Well, I think maybe I already had some interest that way. In our history classes, there's some talk about contemporary politics, and I was thinking about it a little bit. I really started thinking about it, I guess, in 6th grade. It was the Reagan re-election year, and that was when I first really maybe started thinking about organized politics in a particular way. One of my best friends at that time, still a good friend of mine named Mike Dietz, whose parents were both liberal, Catholic, sort of left-wing, Jesuit-educated, Notre Dame graduate professors at Texas Tech. His father was an art professor of Spanish art. So he was the head of the Democratic side in the 6th grade class debate, and I was the head of the Reagan side.
But what pushed you there? Or
well, so a lot of my libertarianism has always just been an instinctive desire to leave people alone and let people find their own answers to things, to not boss people around, not push people around, not try to remake them in your own image. I mean, one of the worst things about our culture is the snobbery of it. And snobbery, I mean that in the true sense of that word, which is not the habits of wealthy and educated people. It's the habits of people who wish they were and imitate them. The word snob comes from an Old English word for shoemaker. So a snob originally was someone from a trade who'd made a little money and starts affecting the manners and interests of the lordly class. So the way people hold in contempt the entertainments and interests of other people, like NASCAR, oh, he's one of those guys who watches NASCAR. He's one of those guys who watches mixed martial arts. And you get that on the right too. Oh, he's one of those people who goes to the opera, that kind of thing. That sort of thing is bothersome to me because, people really are different from one another. And that kind of true diversity, I think, is one of the things that makes life great. It's one of the, Russell Kirk and his, canons of conservatism, the appreciation for actual, true, organic diversity in a society, even when it drives you crazy, even when it's people who have, crazy ideas about things or have interests that you just don't get and that sort of thing. So
Russell Kirk and Edmund Burke both made this argument, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I read Burke as basically being pro-diversity.
Yeah, certainly.
Fundamentally pro-diversity.
Yeah, and I suppose Kirk was in some ways just restating Burke on that.
Yeah.
My experience with the welfare state as such was negative, let's say. And I saw the ways in which it distorted people's decision-making and their sense of selves, and the way that dependency robbed people of their self-respect and their sense of agency. And that was something that I appreciated, even though I couldn't have put it in the terms at that time, from the time I was very young.
What was your experience with the welfare state?
Oh, well, various, family members in, sort of public housing, that kind of thing. My mother was on food stamps for a while. So our family was on food stamps for a while. It was funny. So that was back when you actually got the little, coupon things. It was before the
actual stamps,
before the fake credit cards.
Right.
And so I noticed that for a while, my mother was not going to our usual grocery store. She was sort of driving across town to a different place. And, and that sort of dependency mentality really warped her sense of what she could do in life and what she was responsible for in life. And she never, I think, really recovered from that. So those experiences were bad. I saw that a lot of the things that we did with the idea of helping people didn't actually help them, certainly not in the long term. So, in my general leave people alone mentality, combined with that experience and a few other things, I think led me in that direction. So National Review certainly was a big shaper of that, as well. George Will's column, which ran in our local newspaper, I guess, for a while. Then when I was in high school, at the time in Texas, I don't know if this is still the rule. If it's not, it should be. You had to take an economics class to graduate from high school. And our economics teacher was a coach who I suspect was a closet libertarian. And so the first piece of assigned reading we got was Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. And so that was probably my first contact with sort of rigorous, organized political analysis at that level, as opposed to just sort of journalism, which I didn't.
So the public school system just totally fucked up.
Yeah, they
because they produced you.
They produced me and a few others like me, as it turns out.
That was a big accident.
That was probably not the intended outcome.
No,
I was I was a thorn in the side of the public schools growing up for lots of reasons.
Oh, were you?
Well, so
but you owe your career to them. Why?
Lubbock,
why are you so?
Lubbock, like a lot of small towns. Well, it's not a small town.
You're an in-grade, Kevin.
Lubbock County's 300,000 people, I guess, almost. But these kind of small town-minded, anyway, Baptist-dominated places had some really stupid, superstitious, ideas about things. So during the great satanic panic of the late 80s and early 90s, Lubbock caught that real bad. So the schools already had a pretty strict dress code, but then they got this sort of, occult aspect to it. So when I was in high school, the guy who was the superintendent of schools sent around this memo of occult and some satanic symbols to be on the lookout for. And so one of them was a peace sign. But then another one was a Star of David.
A peace sign?
Yeah, so peace sign and Star of David.
Okay.
And so, you know,
and the Star of David.
Star of David. Okay. So they're like 3 Jewish families.
So Jewish pacifists didn't have a good time.
Right, Jewish pacifists did not have a good time. So I took to, you know...
Daniel Ellsberg should never have come to Lubbock.
Right. So, but the beautiful thing was the guy's name was Moses.
Oh my God.
His name was Mike Moses. And so we did a wonderful cartoon of him as Moses coming down from the mountain with the commandments and the dress code stuff on it. And wrote a very funny editorial mocking him for not knowing about it. Because he came out and said, well, I didn't know that was a Jewish symbol. I was like, how do you not know this? Your name is Moses. So we had a really good time with that. Then, of course, some years later, George W. Bush made him the state education commissioner.
My goodness.
So Bush was not good on that front. So I fought with these guys a lot. I was the kid who was, I was the editor of my high school newspaper, and I would go to school board meetings and, you know, fight with them about stuff and that sort of thing. And my teachers, for the most part, were very encouraging of this sort of thing. And my high school journalism teacher, his name was Bill Kopf, great guy, tremendous help to me in many ways in life, and not just in journalism. You know, he was pretty stand up about it. He was like, you know, he's the editor. I let my students have editorial independence. You know, we don't let them libel anybody or do anything that's going to get us in legal trouble, but we don't let them put anything profane or obscene in the newspaper. But this is legitimate commentary, and you can't shut it down. And so that was great. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
So as a kid, were you just reading books all the time?
Yeah, I read a lot. I read, so I went to E.J. Parsons Elementary School. And at some point in my elementary school, they started leaving the library open during the summers, which was great for me because I didn't have a lot to do in the summers. And it was just down the street from my house, close walk. So I won't say I read every book in that school library, but all of the ones that didn't strike me as being explicitly girls' books, because, you know, when you're in 5th grade, 6th grade, this is a big thing. And the ones that weren't just out of hand boring, I don't think. I probably read maybe 60 to 70% of the books in that library. I read probably every book we had in our house. There used to be a wonderful thing called Riff. I think it's still around.
Yeah, sure.
Reading is fundamental.
Yeah.
And the great thing about Riff was they didn't give you books. They sold them to you. They would sell them to you at some ridiculous price. It was 5 cents or 20 cents or something like that. So you had a sense of investment that this book was important to you because you'd had to pay for it. So I got a lot of books that way. There used to be a lot of used bookstores in Lubbock, oddly enough. There really aren't so much anymore. Of course, used bookstores have
College Town
gone away everywhere. Yeah, but they weren't textbook stores like that. They would be full of, you know, like
College Towns always have.
Louis L'Amour novels and things like that.
College Towns always have used bookstores.
Yeah. So we had a encyclopedia set, the World Book, you know, the door-to-door salesman. And then you'd get the yearbook every year, which is the updates, all the new stuff you need to know for all the world's knowledge. And ours stopped around 1979, I want to say, but I pretty well read all of that.
So you would just read through the encyclopedia. You would pick it up and just read cover to cover.
I did. Yeah, I was that nerdy kid. So
and were you teased about that?
No, I wasn't. So I haven't grown since I was 12. I was a great big kid. My voice changed when I was 10 years old. I started shaving in 6th grade.
How you're not that big. How tall are you?
I'm 5'11".
I had been warned. People had described you to me, and I was expecting a giant monster to walk over. You're not. You're just like above average guy.
Yeah, a little bit
in terms of size. But you were this size when you were 12.
Yeah, okay. I was. Yes, I was the terror of junior high football.
So they left you alone.
So I was not the kid you picked on.
Right.
And but also then after that, and I was in nerd schools, right? I was in these magnet schools.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, at Lubbock High School, you get picked on for not having a good SAT score.
Right.
You know, not because you're a nerd.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know, the schools I went to were very, very competitive on this front. They were very academically competitive. We had the worst 5A football team in Texas history. I did play high school football in West Texas, so I feel like that's basically being in the NFL.
Yeah,
but
it sort of is.
Yeah, in its way. Yeah. But we were the worst. We were everybody's homecoming game because everyone wants to win their homecoming game, right? So every time I see a mum, I just like get a concussion or, you know, aftershocks. So, but no, it was not the kind of school where that sort of thing happened. Where you're more likely to be made fun of for taking Spanish as your foreign language instead of German or Latin.
Right. Were you aware of becoming a political person at any point? Did you at some point say, hey, I'm interested in politics and I'm a libertarian or a conservative? Did you?
Yeah, sure.
And when was that?
Oh, junior high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's early.
So I knew I was more interested in public affairs than most other people were. I knew that I enjoyed arguing about this stuff more than other people did. I remember when I was in 7th or 8th grade world history, they did a mock trial of Kaiser Wilhelm for the crime of starting World War I. And I was Kaiser, of course. And I fired my defense counsel and acted as my own defense. And I made an argument on constitutional grounds that the court didn't have actually any authority to try me one way or the other. And I was acquitted. So
this is in high school in Lubbock?
Yeah, I made poor Whitney Tomlinson, who was a judge in that trial, cry. And she was a really nice girl.
Another young woman you've had trouble with.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Other young men I had trouble with too.
They're piling up, these young women who are trouble. That's fairly sophisticated, high-level stuff you were doing there in high school. I'm impressed.
We had good schools.
Not a lot of people at Yale could do that.
I started, Latin in 7th grade.
Jesus.
And all that fun stuff. Latin in junior high was a lot of fun. Because you had the same, 9 kids all the way through. So it became like a fun little club.
Huh.
Yeah.
How on earth do you explain this? I mean, your origin story, I've had a lot of people on this show who, didn't, were terrible like me, terrible high school students, and maybe didn't go to college. But yours is, I'd say, the most out there.
Well, I don't know so much. So people do what they get praised for.
Except for the magnet system.
People like to do what they're good at, and people do what they get rewarded for.
Yeah.
And when you're someone who doesn't have a lot going on in life, but you're good at school, then you start to really pay attention.
Oh, so you were good in school. You weren't just a little intellectual.
Yeah, so I was good at school.
You were actually getting A's.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was not me.
Grades.
That was not me. Okay.
Most of the way through.
Okay.
So, because you had to qualify to be in the magnet programs.
Okay.
And so, yeah, you do that. And I remember when I was in high school, I told Coach Loudermilk that I was going to quit the football team because I was going to be the editor of the school newspaper. And he's trying to talk me out of it. Why would you want to do that? And I was like, I don't think I'm going to play football for a living, but I might be a journalist.
But then what did you talk? You had siblings, right?
Yeah.
How many? 2?
Depends on how you count. But
who lived with you?
Most of the time growing up, there were 4 of us
in the house.
So it was myself, my adopted brother, and a stepbrother and stepsister.
What did you talk about with them?
I did not have almost anything to do with them.
Yeah, right.
I spent as little time in my house as I could. From the time I, got a car and driver's license and that sort of stuff, I was basically 75% moved out.
Yeah.
And I was emotionally checked out well before that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I had almost no relationship with those folks. I mean, they weren't terrible people or anything. My brother and I still see each other from time to time. Don't have a super close relationship, but not a bad one.
You're just radically different than they are. That's all.
There's that.
Radically different interests.
Yeah, certainly. Although, he maybe not as different as you would expect, but although, yeah, in a lot of ways, certainly. So my stepbrother and stepsister from that period, I hated their father, who was an awful, awful human being, and I had a party actually on the day of his funeral. So I probably transferred more of my ill will toward him onto them than I should have. But I had almost nothing to do with them from the time I moved out. I saw them at my mother's funeral, and I think that's the only time I've seen them since I was in high school.
Right. So who were your big intellectual and political influences early on? Like, when did you discover? Did you read Burke? Did you read Kirk? Did you read
most
Hayek?
of those came later? Yeah, Hayek.
Well, you read Friedman.
Certainly.
You said that.
Yeah. So Friedman, from Friedman, the connection to Hayek and Mises is pretty quick. Read Ayn Rand, more or less dismissed her as. Were
you identifying as a libertarian?
Yeah.
In high school?
As soon as I learned the word. Yeah,
okay.
Basically.
Oh, wow.
Like,
in high school.
Sort of where I am. Yeah, I suppose so.
Wow.
And certainly, yeah, in high school.
You were that guy.
I was that guy, yeah. I was that guy in a big way.
Yeah.
I was that guy in a big way. So.
You know what that guy did? He slept with my girlfriend in college, and I'm still a little bit hurt by that.
Well, I'm sorry about that.
The one libertarian guy, but it's okay. I won't hold it against all of you.
There's always one of them. So I had literary influences before I had
let's talk
other
about
kinds
that.
of influences. So certainly Bill Buckley, who I got to know a little bit later in life, which was kind of wonderful. I picked up a copy of Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test at a garage sale.
I love that book.
25 cents.
God, I love that book.
I didn't know anything about it. I just liked the title. I thought it was cool. And that was, a door opening. I actually got to meet him a couple of times too later in life, and that was tremendously fun. And So he was a huge thing for me.
Now, wait a second. Now, Buckley and Tom Wolfe, in particular, Electric Kool-Aid, major differences there between those two.
Well, yes and no. I mean, they both wrote with a great deal of verve and individual style.
For sure.
They weren't...
but what would Buckley... I mean, well, we know what Buckley thought of that whole scene. This is about Ken Kesey and his sort of counterculture of the 50s and 60s.
Bill was an enormous admirer of Tom Wolfe's. He said he was the best writer in America.
Oh, no, I meant of what he was writing about.
Oh, yeah, of the...
He's famously...
dope and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean...
There's a famous picture of Bill smoking a joint.
Is there really?
Yeah. So Bill was pro-legalization. National Review's been pro-legalization since the 70s.
I guess I knew that, yeah.
And so someone asked him, well, isn't that illegal, Mr. Buckley? And he said, well, it was in international waters. And so someone
I did know that.
Someone had the wit to ask him,
right.
Well, where did you get the marijuana? And he said, parthenogenesis. So I think Bill certainly was not a fan of the counterculture as such. He called the Beatles the crowned heads of anti-music. Anyone who hates the Beatles that much, the least offensive part of the 60s. But he was an admirer, I think, of style and accomplishment and verve and wit.
He liked Wolfe. He didn't like Kesey.
Well, I have no idea what his opinion of Ken Kesey was. Ken Kesey was a good writer. He wrote a couple of really very good things. Now, a lot of people in that world weren't. I don't think William S. Burroughs was a very good or interesting writer.
Right.
A lot of, I think, some of the more romanticized of the Beats and such weren't actually very good writers. So some of them were actually quite good. I think Big Sur is a terrific novel. Maybe one of the best short books ever written about alcoholism. Yeah.
So we haven't even mentioned this. So one of the ways in which you really stand out, I think, is that you're one of very, very few political writers in this country who I would call a prose stylist, who even cares, I think.
Well, there's a thing of like writing blandly means you're serious.
Yeah.
So
in politics especially.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you write for the Washington Post, and I've written for the Washington Post, and thank you, Ruth Marcus, for publishing me. I like doing that. But even the Wall Street Journal to an extent, and some of the other big newspapers, blandness to them is seriousness, and adverbs and adjectives and such are not. And exclamation points, you get one in your career, that sort of thing. Mike Patemra, who was the literary editor of National Review for a long time, he just died, unfortunately, passed away in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. Great guy, loved him to death, but he also gave me one of the best insults I ever got in my life, which was I wrote something for his section that was, for me, uncharacteristically dry and straightforward. And Mike said, "Don't worry about it, Kevin. Even Tom Wolfe doesn't try to write like Tom Wolfe all the time." And I thought that was pretty good. And I told Tom Wolfe that story, actually. He thought it was funny. But yeah, I think that when you're writing, especially if you write longer stuff, I'll write a 700-word op-ed with the best of them. But what I like to do are these long reported pieces that take up a lot of space and take some time to read, which is kind of why I was looking forward to working for The Atlantic, because that's what they specialize in. So I'm the guy at National Review who writes, a 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 word story sometimes. And when you're doing that, you are a guest in someone else's life. You're a guest in their head. And I think that it's just kind of good manners to try to be entertaining, because they're investing something in you. So give them something back. If they wanted to read a white paper, they could look up a white paper.
Yeah.
If they wanted to get a lecture on, symbolism and iconography in Spanish art, they can call my friend Professor Dietz. But if they want to read a story about something, then tell them a story about something. Yeah. It's kind of like when I do public speaking and public appearances of various kind. My clothes have often been sort of commented on. If you're going to put on a show, right? Yeah. People come to journalism partly for information, but they come to my kind of journalism also for perspective, but also entertainment, I think. And we shouldn't ever forget we're in the entertainment business. Someone, might have been Kingsley Amis, once said that the big difference between journalism in the United States and the United Kingdom is in the UK, journalism is a subset of literature.
That's right.
In the United States, it's a subset of politics.
That's right.
And I think of myself, I was someone who wanted to be a writer first. I wanted to have Tom Wolfe's life and career, not George Will's. As much as I like George Will, he's a wonderful writer, a gifted writer. But I didn't want to be, I don't want to be the guy on the Sunday morning talk show saying, well, this week was a good week for the president because blah, 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 blah. It's just not what I want to do. And this stuff's fine to do. And when lots of people are good at it, lots of my friends are good at it. And it's a set of skills that are worth having, I think. But they aren't my set of skills, and they aren't really my interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I was in college, I decided I was going to be a socialist because that's what I was supposed to do, being from socialist parents. And so I thought, I'm proud of myself for this. I thought, well, I'm going to find out what the enemy says. And I'm going to find the smartest enemy and see what they do. So I went and did exactly what you did. I went and got the National Review at the Antioch College Library, and I would sit down on a regular basis with that thing, and I would read Buckley's columns, and I would study them, how he constructed an argument and how he wrote them. I paid attention to the prose because I wanted to be a writer too, first and foremost, before being political, just like you. You are about the only American political journalist whose prose I pay attention to as much as their argument. And when I read you, I am pretty much 50-50. I'm spending half my brain is focusing on the content of the argument, and 50% of it is focusing on your style. And I love that because you do it well. I think you do it very well. You're definitely reminiscent of Buckley to me. I know I'm not kissing ass, but of all the National Review writers, I would say that you, from my perspective, are the closest to what
we write in a very, very different way. So, I do these kind of,
You're more Wolfian, actually, now that I think about it. Now that you mentioned that, I do see Wolf in you too, yeah.
Or, there's a little David Foster Wallace, that sort of thing.
Okay,
I steal from all those guys. Whereas Bill was a very clear and limpid sort of writer. So, like, Jay Norlinger writes a lot like Bill, where it seems effortless. Now, if you're a writer and you know how this stuff works, you can tell that there's a lot of work that goes into making it look this easy.
Right.
It's not actually that easy.
He was also a modernist, wouldn't you say? Like in terms of his, and you're not,
and
you're
his personal
not so much,
and those sorts of things. Well, I mean, maybe an early modernist. I'm sort of a Wallace Stevens guy more than
I'd say you're a little postmodernist, a little bit, maybe, at least in your style. And David Foster Wallace.
Certainly something to that. I like, Bill always seemed like he was having fun, which is the reason I wanted to be more like Bill. Right, when I was reading him, this looks like fun. Yeah. So I write for myself essentially, and I write stuff that's fun. For me, it's fun. Sometimes you're writing about horrible things, but you're still writing about them in a way that is hopefully enjoyable to read and useful to read. So, unlike a lot of young conservatives, one mistake in life I did manage to avoid. I made a lot of mistakes in life, and most of the mistakes you can make, I have made in life. But one of the ones that I managed to avoid is I never really went through the trying to write like Bill Buckley stage. Some people, they want to do that, and they think it's a matter of thesaurus and fancy words and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't the fancy words that made Bill's writing what it was. It's the fancy thinking. He was someone who made connections in a way that was very brief and very direct, but not obvious to people. And that was the great thing about Bill. Bill was sort of an Oscar Wilde almost in some ways, where it's cancel my subscription, cancel your own goddamn subscription. That's that's the answer to that, right? And Bill was great at these one-liners and things. Like, remember Notes and Asides, where he would answer his correspondence in the magazine. It was the best thing he did in a lot of ways. The first thing I always read, because it was always just so wonderful to read. And he could do in 3 words, 3 ordinary English words that didn't have 10 syllables, that were not sesquipedalian, as they would say. He could do more with that than most other people could. Now, Tom Wolfe is a different sort of writer in that, he would put in 10,000 exclamation points and fun with typography. And I was a newspaper editor for a long time, so I like typography, and I like, small caps and things like that, and playing with those sorts of things. And I do think they have some emotional resonance that you can use if you know how to use it. And I probably know typography better than most writers do, because most writers don't think about that sort of thing too often. So that aspect of it, I think, is fun, and I try to be fun that way. So there are people like Ramesh Ponnuru is a good example of this. Ramesh is very smart. He's a very good writer, and Ramesh holds in suspicion the sort of writing that I do. And so you can if you read Ramesh's prose, you can see how he just scrubs it out. And so Ramesh is the most, here's what happened, here's the thing going on, here's what I think about it, here's why you're a moron, and goes through. And he's really good at that, and I can't really do that kind of writing as well as he does, and I can't write the way Jay does as well as Jay does. Or, Rich Lowry, who is, he's been a magazine editor most of his adult life, I guess. He's been editor of National Review since he was in his 20s. but he has a really good reporting style. You know,
Right.
he's a guy who would have been a great
Right.
sort of Capitol Hill reporter back in the 1950s.
Exactly.
You know, filing stories from the phone booth sort of thing. And,
Right, but their prose is all pretty much interchangeable. I couldn't tell a Rich Lowry prose. I couldn't tell a sentence that was written by him.
For National, well,
Whereas I could identify a sentence or a paragraph written by you.
Yeah, mine are easier to do, I think.
I would have no
Now,
idea.
as someone who edited National Review copy for a long time, I can tell the difference. But so, you know, Jay Nordlinger is a very distinctive writer, I think. Rick Brookhiser is a very distinctive writer, especially in his books. He's one of the best writers of works at that length.
I know these guys too well, but
you know, there are a lot of people who are doing online commentary or conservative magazine commentary of various kinds who are just saying, today in liberal hypocrisy, no. And it's like, you know, it's
mechanical.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of, you know, Beavis from Beavis and Butthead was like that. And, you know, here's something that mystifies me. So we're talking about me in writing, is that particularly among a lot of the people on the left I hear from, I have a reputation for being a really angry writer.
Yeah.
And I think of myself as being the least angry writer I know.
Yeah.
I very rarely, now sometimes, you know, in a podcast or something or in a public debate, I will flash a little bit that way. But I don't think my writing very often is that angry. But I think to some people it reads that way. And I suspect, well, some people, readers bring what they bring to it, right? They think of conservatives as being angry and denunciatory and that sort of thing.
I think it's actually clarity is courage. I think there is, yes, your prose can be, I suppose, florid. It might be the word.
Sure.
But actually, to me, what stands out is the clarity of it, and that you are very much like me in this way. It's like, I want to get to the bottom of an argument and I want to know what its logical conclusions are. Yeah. Right. And Buckley did this too, right? It's like, let's flesh out this whole thing, this whole construct that you have, this argument that you have, if it's someone you agree with or not, right? Let's just see it played out entirely. What is this whole an argument can create an entire world, right? If you let it go.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, to me, what you did with the abortion stuff. And that's what you do generally. Like with immigration also, I make the same argument you do, which is there's a law, right? Set of laws written, by the way, mostly by Democratic politicians, I might add, 1965 Immigration Act. Yeah. And now we're screaming about enforcing the law and how that is what Nazis do. Well, it's your law, and recent piece you wrote in National Review says, either enforce the law or change the law.
You guys in Congress know some lawmakers, I assume, if you don't like what the law says.
That, to me, the immigration debate now is where the left is just so dishonest, it's not even...
Well, the interesting thing about
it's not even funny.
So we've already got kind of in our own law a good example of that. Because, so if you wanted to decriminalize illegal border crossing, it's a fairly easy statutory fix. You can decriminalize. You can make it a civil offense.
Sure.
So, for instance, being present illegally in the United States is not a criminal matter. It's a civic violation. So it can affect, you know, you can get fined for it. It can affect, you know, your future immigration efforts if you try to immigrate. But it's not a criminal offense. The criminal offense is illegally crossing the border. So if you wanted to decriminalize that, you could still enforce immigration law if you wanted to.
Sure.
You know, it's a fairly easy thing to say, we're going to make this no longer a criminal matter. We're going to make it a statutory civic offense. So, but no one wants to do that because, you know, it's opera, right? You know, it's stand in the middle of the stage and make dramatic noises and wear a hat with pointy horns and that sort of thing. So it's all angst and wailing, you know, and that's all that there is to it.
Right. It's Teddy Kennedy's bill. It's his law. He wrote it.
Sure, yeah.
With the AFL-CIO and the unions and Cesar Chavez in 1965.
Right. Well, it's like healthcare, you know. I mean, 90% of what they tried to fix in the Affordable Care Act was a problem because of earlier attempts to fix quote-unquote healthcare.
Right.
You know, people hate HMOs. Hey, Ted Kennedy invented those in the last attempt to try to fix healthcare. Right. So a lot of, you know, this stuff is new regulations to try to undo the unintended consequences of old regulations, which is kind of the oldest libertarian argument.
What people really don't know is that there was no quota even under the 1924 truly racist immigration law for Mexico. So the 1965 law, which replaced the 1924 racist law, imposed a brand new quota on Mexico and Latin America generally. Before then, they were letting the Mexicans cross the border whenever they wanted because they needed people to pick their strawberries and their grapes.
Yeah.
So in 65, there's a quota, right? And that's when Mexicans become illegal. That's a Democratic Party law. That's Teddy Kennedy. That's AFL-CIO. It's Cesar Chavez protecting his own union from non-union competition. It's Lyndon Baines Johnson, your fellow Texan, who signed the law.
He was a rat bastard.
And that, yes, indeed, he was. And that is the law that Trump is enforcing.
Yeah. Yeah, like it or not.
I mean, yeah, and it's sort of like, well, and I agree with you. Like, but you're the only other person I've ever seen say this directly in print, which is you can't scream about the enforcement of a law that your people, first of all, put into place.
Or at least a law that you have the power to change.
And you can also change the law.
Yeah.
Right, but you can't say we're going to have a law, but we can't enforce it.
Yeah, I mean,
or it's evil to enforce it.
Give Republicans this much. They bitch about taxes all the time, but they do change the law from time to time when they get the power to.
Exactly.
You know, the borders thing is interesting because I have kind of complicated views on immigration. I'm generally pretty pro-immigration, but I'm sort of an elitist about it. I want us to, you know, let more rich, high-skilled, highly educated people into the country and fewer people who are not. So I think we don't have a deficit of poor people.
So that's not terribly libertarian of you, which is fine. But
yeah, I'm not an ideologue. But you know, if you look at the way immigration habits have changed over the years, you know, a lot of what's driving this isn't policy changes, but technological changes. So people talk about open borders as a scare story. Oh, we're going to have open borders. We'll be overrun. You know who had open borders? Victorian England.
Mm-hmm.
When Joseph Conrad arrived in the United Kingdom, he didn't have to so much as show a passport.
And the United States, basically. I mean,
yeah, we're pretty close to it. Yeah. What's changed, of course, is that travel's more efficient, communication's more efficient, and so immigration, the character of immigration changes. And Mexico is a particular challenge because it is a bordering country. So when, you know, the Irish immigrants came over here, when they came in the, you know, 19th century and the early 20th century, you weren't flying back home to Belfast every other weekend. And you weren't having even long distance phone calls that often. So it was pretty easy to assimilate them. They assimilated really quite quickly. The Italians, who everyone thought were an unassimilable Catholic minority, turned out to be pretty easy to assimilate.
Yeah.
But along, you know, we have a lot of very poorly assimilated Spanish-speaking communities in America. Now, where I'm from, West Texas, this is no big deal. We are a border culture. We're a border community. We've had Anglos and Latinos living close together for a long time. There's a modus vivendi that's developed over time. It's no big deal. And again, it's like Las Vegas, right? You can have Las Vegas, but you don't want the whole country to be Las Vegas. You can have Nogales in West Texas and in Southern California to an extent. And these are normal border places in the same way that Northern Maine has a very strong, you know, kind of Canadian presence. Where people really started to flip out is when you started seeing, you know, Salem cigarette signs in Spanish in Newport Beach, or not Newport Beach, I'm sorry, Newport News, or
Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia, or in Norwalk, Connecticut, and places like that. Or when suddenly in Arlington you've got, you know, thousands of people who speak Spanish and live in sort of separate ghettoized communities that are not going to be assimilated. And that's not El Paso, you know, that's Arlington, Virginia. Or that's, you know, Norwalk, Connecticut, where I lived for a while, was a really interesting case that way, where they had a large influx of Hispanic immigrants. And they're just doing a terrible job assimilating them. And maybe they don't necessarily want to be assimilated because they are mainly economic immigrants. They're here to work and send money home. So the border communities have sort of always understood this stuff and always been able to deal with it. The same way upstate New York and Maine are able to deal with their borders. But for the rest of the country is when it starts to get weird.
So when you're talking about border communities, you're talking about places in which, I take it, there are distinct groups that are unassimilated into the dominant American culture.
Well,
is that what you mean? There are, like, in Lubbock, there are Mexicans or Mexican Americans who basically have a very distinct culture. Is that what you mean?
Well, it's the whole place has a distinct culture is the way it works. So in West Texas, you've had Anglos and Latinos living and working side by side for hundreds of years. You know, the joke that we didn't cross the border crossed us. Sure. There are a lot of families in West Texas or San Antonio and the Valley where that's literally true of. There are families, you know, they're Mexican farmers down in Texas and ranchers who've been on their land for hundreds of years.
It's one of the things I noticed when I was in Texas. I was in Texas really for the first time last month. And I noticed, like, old money Mexican families. And I was like, what? Where? Because I'm from California, so I've been around Mexicans my whole life, but I never saw that anyway. Like old money, like multi-generation.
This is something I want to
Mexican families.
So West Texas versus Southern California.
Yeah.
Or Texas Valley versus Southern California.
Different, very different.
Because Texas, the border communities were poor. This is my thesis anyway. There wasn't that much to fight over economically or socially. So you've got pretty harmonious relations. So like even Lubbock, where I'm from, or the small towns around there, which are maybe a little bit redneck about racial stuff, like intermarriage between, Anglos and Latinos is not an issue the way intermarriage between, say, blacks and whites would have been in the 60s or 70s. Huh. It's like if you're a poor college student in Lubbock, Texas, going to Texas Tech, you think nothing about moving into a largely working class Hispanic neighborhood because it's cheap to live there in a way that you would never move into a poor black neighborhood. It just doesn't happen. It never comes up. It's not because you're a racist. It's just, well, maybe it is because you're a racist, but that's just how society works.
Right.
So but Southern California is like apartheid, right? Where everyone in a service job is Hispanic and all the people they're serving are Anglo. And there's a very bright dividing line between Anglos and Latinos in Southern California. Los Angeles feels like apartheid.
Absolutely.
In a way that even, Arizona or Nevada or West Texas or South Texas don't. So they've been less successful that way. There's a lot to admire about California. There's a lot of good things in Californian culture, but that's not one of them. So because we've had these natural hybrid cultures that developed organically along the borders for a long time, there's a lot less tension that way. But when you start inserting those communities, it was like the Somalis in Minnesota, right? Yeah. You've got a group of people who are visually distinctive, obviously, because there aren't a lot of African Americans. And certainly not a lot of Somalis.
And Somalis look different than most African Americans.
I suppose so, yeah.
Very different.
I suppose so, yeah. And
they're very distinctive.
But Minnesota's a pretty white place. Minneapolis is a pretty white place. And so you've got these people who are, black, Muslim, speaking with accents or different languages, things like that, living in separate kind of communities. Amarillo actually has a very large Somali population. They tend to work in slaughterhouses.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. Amarillo has the largest per capita refugee population in the United States. Mostly Somalis, but also Iranians, Iraqis.
It's the feds chose it, right? That's why they're there.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's how the refugee thing works.
They direct
it's
them.
All directed. It's all social engineering.
Yeah. So these communities have proven harder to assimilate in a way that, say, your 19th century Italians and Irish weren't, because they're still connected to back home, because they can travel back home more often, because we have all these wonderful things that make communication easier. So,
but wait a minute. What's your position on assimilation? Are you pro or con, or more nuanced?
Oh, I'm pretty pro assimilation.
Really? Well, how does that comport with your views on diversity? You said you like diversity. That's kind of your first cause was diversity of ideas, of cultures, of people.
Yeah.
Why do you want them all to assimilate into the dominant American culture in this giant, ridiculous country called the United States that has 350 million people in it?
Yeah, I don't think polities work without a culture.
Okay.
Without a shared culture. And also, and this will probably cost me a job somewhere down the road in life, but there's certain cultures I don't think that much of.
Well, of course.
And,
what idiot has, it's the same views of every culture on earth? I mean, that's ridiculous.
I don't,
You prefer some over others. I do too.
Well, I'm a sort of a Western supremacist, I guess it would be fair to say. I think that,
fine.
It's worth assimilating in. So,
okay.
We're talking about diversity within a certain...
so it's your preference. You prefer that they assimilate into the dominant culture, but do you want to force them?
No, I'm generally against measures of force of all sorts.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to invite people to come live in your country, then you're inviting them to come live in your country. And it's not, but X, Y, and Z on top of it, unless you make that explicit, of course. And European countries, actually, some of them take a stronger stance on this particular.
So which parts of America do you want them to assimilate? Right? Because there are many parts of the American culture, the dominant culture.
Yeah. Well, I'm essentially talking about Anglo-Protestant classical liberalism.
Okay.
Our basic moral, political, and intellectual foundations. The kind of diversity that is, we're religiously distinct. We're Muslims or we're this particular sect of Islam. Fine. Don't mind that kind of stuff. There are places in Texas where people still speak German at home. Go to Fredericksburg. People speak German on the streets. It's very weird. But again, you can have a Fredericksburg. Do you want your whole country to be Fredericksburg?
Right.
I don't think you really do. So I think that, having a couple of pockets of unassimilated or only partly assimilated immigrants around the country at various times of various kinds is probably an okay thing. I think it's easy to get too much of that. And there are social stresses associated with that. And some of these are times when you just have to take into account the thing I hate most in life, which is public opinion. But people really do have strong preferences about things. And in a country that's basically democratic and liberal, you can't just ignore that. So economically, for instance, the argument for immigration is sound. The pro-immigration people have by far the stronger side of the argument in terms of pure economic questions. I'm persuaded of this.
I mean, it's aggregate, right? I mean, obviously,
not that there won't be any losers.
It negatively affects certain people, but overall society gains economically, no doubt.
But immigration is not a purely economic question.
Correct.
There are cultural things attached to it. There are political aspects attached to it. And there's also how people feel attached to it. And I think that that's what really happened when I was talking about, getting unassimilated Spanish-speaking communities in, say, Northern Virginia, where people aren't used to it. The cultural reaction to that there was very, very strong. And I would talk to people, particularly in Fairfield County, Connecticut, who are these, nice liberals whose kids go to Choate and those sorts of things. And they voted for Mondale back in the day, and they've still got the bumper sticker on the car to prove it and all that, and parked in front of their $7 million house because it's Fairfield County. But they're freaked out by this stuff. And one immigrant family moves into a community. That's great. Hey, the Vietnamese family's here. It's one more fun thing at the potluck every year, and that's great. But when you suddenly got, billboards going up in Spanish and Spanish language publications, Spanish language radio in, Northern Virginia or New England and places like that, then the locals freak out a little bit. And we do have to take that into consideration because that is one of the things that put Trump in the White House. Whether they're right to have these feelings or wrong to have these feelings, the Kate Steinle thing and the murder committed by an illegal immigrant, even though immigrants have in general a low average crime rate, Trump was able to demagogue that issue in a very, very effective way because people do have these feelings out there that aren't spoken to by responsible parties. And that's what's happening in Europe right now, where the responsible political parties will not deal seriously with the questions related to immigration, and particularly to high levels of immigration from the Islamic world, and the way this changes the character of your society, which it just does. And when responsible parties won't deal with that in a serious and substantive way, irresponsible parties will, because people want to have power. And anytime there's an issue out there that's not being spoken to, that's an invitation to somebody to be the champion of that issue.
I'm really interested in this particularism versus universalism question, which we're talking about here in a way. And you made an argument on a podcast about 2 years ago that I thought was pretty awesome because it made me think really hard about
probably won't remember this.
A position I took. I could be misremembering what you said, or I may have misconstrued it at the time too. But I took what you said as being an argument that the liberal discourse about immigration is universalist, in that it becomes a humanitarian issue, right? For people on the left and liberals, right? In other words,
which to an extent it is, of course.
Well, right, but the discourse is that we are obligated to help those other people who want to come here, which, and you pointed that out. I think you even used the term Wilsonian. Is that possible?
Maybe. Yeah.
I took it as, at least at the time, I remember thinking, oh my God, because I'm basically open borders guy, right? But I don't use the moralistic language, and I don't use the humanitarian universalist language. But I noticed, but you made me notice that a lot of libertarians, by the way, and leftists both use basically Wilsonian arguments to advance a pro-immigration politics, right? Which is that all the world should come here so that we can make them just like us.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to that, I think.
It's like the exact opposite of Burkean conservatism, right?
Yeah, well, certainly that. I mean, the problem with the Wilsonian view of things and the progressive view more generally is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. And the matter of fact is that societies, economies, organic social arrangements are not manageable in the way that they think they are. People are not chess pieces you can move around on a board and say, well, we need 50,000 more people from Mexico. That's the right number. And 30,000 more people from Guatemala and 10,000 Syrians. And that's the right mix. And that's the problem with regulating immigration, and I am in favor of regulating it. I mean, there will always be a certain arbitrary cutoff there, and there's always a central planning aspect to it that makes me uncomfortable. But again, we're not talking about it in purely economic terms. We're talking about it in purely economic terms. I'd say, yeah, let the markets work. The markets will clear. But yeah, there is this. So one of the other problem with Wilsonianism, of course, is that it's messianic.
Yeah.
There's this idea that we are the world's saviors, and the idea that the United States government is a global entity rather than a national entity. And this is where we often run into trouble in the immigration debate, and also because people misunderstand the economics of it, I think, the trade debate. So one of the things I always write about when I write about immigration is, yes, it sucks to be a poor person in Pakistan. Yes, it sucks to be a poor person in Mexico, Guatemala, Peru. It kind of sucks to be poor almost anywhere, but if you're going to be poor, the United States is kind of the place to be poor, or maybe Western Europe.
For sure.
Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But the responsibility of the American government is to the American people. It is their instrument. It's not their ruler. The people are sovereign in this country. The government is just a tool that they use to enact the laws that their representatives have passed. And it's there to act in their interest. So yes, we will do things on a humanitarian basis from time to time. We will take refugees from time to time. We don't have to be that penny pinching, country that says, well, we're not giving you $1 of aid because it's $1 we can't spend filling potholes in Sheboygan. Which always happens, like every election. We're spending all this money overseas. Why aren't we building roads and highways in Sheboygan? And because it's important to be involved in the rest of the world. And there's aspects of that we have to do. But the fundamental responsibility of the American government is to the American people. And that's whose interests it's there to look out after. So yes, it would absolutely be in the interests of every poor person in Pakistan, India, Thailand to relocate to the United States. Life gets immediately better for them a lot. Would that be in the interest of the American people? Well, you could convince them that it is. You might make a pretty good argument that it is, but they don't think that right now. And you kind of at some point have to go with what they think about the big picture things. I mean, it sort of maybe goes back to the thing I was saying about Switzerland, where irrespective of how you feel about the economics of immigration or how you feel about the cultural aspect of it or whatnot, you don't have a consensus for open borders right now. You don't have a consensus for high levels of immigration at all. If you have a consensus for anything, it's continued restricted levels of legal immigration and policing illegals at the border. That's what people seem to say they want. Of course, they don't always get what they want, but that is what people seem to say they want. Now, again, this is a problem of running into the question of consensus versus, plebiscite democracy, right? So I don't think we just take a poll and do that. I don't think public opinion should govern everything. That's not what I'm saying. And especially public opinion at any given moment that you measure it. Mm-hmm. No, that's a recipe for chaos and demagoguery and the rest of it. But you do have to take it into account, and you do have to have consensus for big major policy changes. You do have to have some consensus for the big major policy stances. So things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I want to reform those with a machete, right? I want to abolish those programs. I would abolish them tomorrow if I could. But there is no consensus for doing that. Now, there may be some consensus emerging for trying to put them on a more stable financial footing, maybe by means testing, maybe by raising retirement ages, some things like that. So you do have to work within what's possible as a matter of consensus, not only because you live in a democracy and that limits what's doable, but also because that's what's wise. Because if you push things too far outside of that, you're going to get a reaction, and the reaction's bound to be stupid. And this is what we've seen in presidential politics, right? It's these crazy pendulum swings. George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump. This is not a country that knows what it wants. And this is not a country in which there is any consensus about the character of the national government and what the president should be doing, what he should be like, what manner of man he should be. And I think that is
how could there be
a source of instability.
How could there be consensus among 350 million people?
Well, we had,
do we even want that?
We had fairly good consensus from time to time among 200 million people.
But wouldn't it be better just to have an entity with fewer people in it before we start seeking consensus? A consensus among that many people is terrifying to me.
Well, I understand the
on anything.
I understand the argument about. Well, I don't think so actually. I mean, stock prices are consensus. What's going to be on the shelves in Walmart?
I meant sort of public policy.
Well, but I think these things they're similar kinds of models, right? So I don't think the problem is the size of the country. I think it's the scope of the federal government. Now, this will sound like Durka conservative stuff, but it's not just that. So if you have a government that's doing fewer things, doing them better, and doing things that are truly of a national character, such as foreign relations, international trade relations, immigration, national security, things that are truly national character that can't be done at the local level, that can't really be done at the state level. You know, Lubbock County can't have its own anti-missile defense system. It's just not going to work. Not that they're going to shoot Lubbock first. Although Lubbock used to be high on the nuke list, apparently, because Reese Air Force Base was there, which was a pilot training facility. So, I was in 6th grade. We were still getting under the desks. And I was thinking, like, 200 megaton bomb, I don't think the desk is going to save me.
Because the Ruskies actually had their targets on you.
Yeah, they did. So, so with a government with a national government especially that's doing fewer things, you can probably get more consensus on the policy pieces. But the other problem there is cultural, which is what George Will calls Caesaropapism. The idea of the president as this august monarchical figure. Now, if the president is your national embodiment, then we're never going to agree on that. Because we are culturally two distinct countries. Yeah. Red America and Blue America, as they call them, are very different places.
At least two.
Yeah, at least two.
Yeah. But
and
very distinct.
Texas is its own thing, and all that. Yeah. So if it's going to be a cultural tribal fight, then no, you'll never get over it. If we could somehow get the presidency back in the box and make the president what he's supposed to be, which is essentially the chief operating officer of the federal government, basically the chief administrator of the federal bureaucratic apparatus, which is an important job and one you would hope they would do well, and which no president has done well since probably, Nixon.
I'm not sure any of them have.
Nixon was managerially very competent.
He was.
Caligula that way, Caligula was a very good administrator, and it wasn't until he lost interest in his duties that the Praetorian Guard and the rest of the Roman elites turned on him. No one cared about his personal life.
Interesting. So what are you going to do now? You're freelance. You still write for the National Review on a regular basis, and you write for other outlets. But what's the long game here?
Well, I don't know. I'll continue to do journalism as I have done. The thing about the Atlantic business was I like the Atlantic very much, and it's a magazine that I enjoy reading, and I would have been
me too
proud to have been associated with. But in the end, it's just shelf space. It's just shelf space. Now, it's good shelf space. It's primo shelf space, but it's just shelf space. And the product is the product, right? I mean, what I write is what I write. And people who like to read the stuff that I write are going to find it wherever it is. And then in terms of infrastructure and support and that sort of thing, it's nice to be part of a big entity like that. It's great to write for the New York Times if you're a New York Times reporter, right? Because you call up and say, hi, this is Kevin from the New York Times. And people take your calls and they talk to you and that sort of thing. And you've got... if you need 8 weeks to work on a story and you need to go some weird place to do it, you can do it because it's the Times, right? And if you're maybe commentary, the Weekly Standard or National Review or the New Criterion or something like that, you can't quite do that as much. I can't, if I'm going to do something for a National Review, I can't tell Rich Lowry I'm going to take 6 months to work on this story and you're going to pay me and have my insurance and all that sort of stuff. And you're not going to hear a word from me for the next 6 months because I'm going to Tibet to write about Tibetan nationalism. And you just can't do that at an enterprise like that. They don't have the resources. So, but I'll keep doing, what I do. And hopefully I will spend more time doing the long reported work, which I think is where I really contribute the most. I like doing the daily op-ed stuff. That's fine. And, here's why Democrats suck today. It's half of conservative journalism, I suppose. But
it's somewhat ephemeral. That's one of the reasons I chose not to be a journalist.
Yeah.
In that way.
Yeah, that stuff, it is.
It tends not to be remembered.
Right. Well, there are two things you can do in this kind of writing, right? You can be entertaining and illuminating, which is what I try to do. But you can also be useful on a daily basis, right? So there are some things that I know that I can explain to people that are actually useful. And I don't have a great deal of formal education in economics, but I read a lot of economics and I spend a lot of time talking to economists. And I have some ability, I think, to explain these terms, economic conditions to people in terms they can understand. And I think that's useful that I do that from time to time. And there's certain other aspects of the things I do. So even if it's just like, we're arguing about the tax cut bill this week or spending money on X, Y, and Z, it's useful to put that stuff in context. Now, is someone going to look at that 10 years from now and go, yeah, we really value that thing that Williamson did. Let's put that in the compendium. That's probably not going to happen. But it's still useful, and I try to be useful where I can. But, if I had my druthers, I would spend, probably half my time doing long reported journalism and half my time working on books.
Yep.
And maybe some cultural criticism too. I liked being a theater critic. I like doing that sort of work still.
Books are not ephemeral. Books really matter, and they matter forever.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah, I mean, much more than articles, for sure.
No, I don't think my Kesey can.
I mean, they're very much career defining for better or worse.
Yeah, they can be, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm working on a couple of those as we speak,
All right.
and hopefully those will be out within the next 12 months or so. And so that's what I'll be doing.
Huh. And when you go to New York City, are you looking over your shoulder? Are you worried that people are going to recognize you and do something to you?
Oh, people recognize me all the time.
Yeah. What happens?
Usually it's okay.
The guys from Chapo Trap House don't like come and assault you with.
What is it? I've heard of this, but I don't know.
They have a special thing for you.
Do they?
Yeah, they really enjoy talking about you as a monster.
Got it. So one thing is, I don't actually read about myself very much. I don't pay much attention to that sort of thing. So I know there's some
you're not missing much.
There's some organized,
I just find it fascinating, the phenomenon of the Williamson hatred.
Well, I'm a little bit flattered by it, but I'm also I feel a little bit bad about it because it's such a one-sided relationship. I mean, there are these people out there to whom apparently I'm very important.
Oh yeah.
And they aren't important to me. I don't care. They're not the audience.
Oh, so you feel bad for them.
Well, I feel bad about the one-sidedness of the relationship, right? I feel like I'm, letting them down in some way. I mean, they aren't the people I write for, and they're not people who matter to me. I know who my audience is. I mean, a lot of them I know personally. So I was in, you know what Academy is? Sporting goods store. Mm-hmm. So it's a big like Dick's or Sports Authority or something like that. And I was in one in Houston. And it was great because I was in character, right? So I was buying ammunition. I was buying 6.5 Creedmoor rifle rounds because I was going out to the range that day. And this guy walks by, and he's like sort of a, frat bro kind of looking guy. He's maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, flip-flop shorts, button-down shirt, and he's on his cell phone. And he turns around to me, but the great thing is he doesn't get off his cell phone and goes, "Oh, hey, Kevin Williamson." He puts out his hand, shakes my hand. "Love your work. Great, cool." And then he goes back to his conversation. I was like, that's actually my spot, right?
Yeah.
So I'm important enough to him that he wants to come say hi, but not important enough to get off the phone. Yeah. So that's a sweet spot to be in for me. So that's
where you want to be. That's where you want to be?
Well, that's okay, yeah. People like really, famous pundit types, like, say, Jonah Goldberg, people like that, or Ann Coulter. That's like actually being a celebrity, where it's hard to go out probably in public.
Oh yeah.
Ann Coulter probably. I mean, not in Palm Beach where she lives, I guess, but if she goes to a restaurant,
she can't go anywhere
on the Upper East Side.
Jonah could get by. Most people will not recognize him, but
yeah, you'd be surprised.
In DC, Manhattan circles maybe, but but Coulter pretty much can't go anywhere. Plus she's like 7 feet tall.
She's very recognizable. Yeah. So I'm not sure I actually want that because
it's hell. I can't imagine.
Yeah. So every now and then, people stop me on the street every now and then, especially in New York or Washington, more often there than they do in Dallas or Houston or Lubbock or Amarillo.
Well, I don't know if
when I was living in New York, I did a lot more television. And when I was doing more television, obviously people recognize you more.
There's a special hatred they have for you. I don't know if I should tell you this or not. I don't know. I mean, it's just, I just find it so curious.
Yeah.
You have a particular niche in their consciousness. There's like something particular, like I think it's your looks as part of it.
Yeah.
Because they're very concerned about how you look, and they see that as evidence of your innate evil. But I've always wondered about the Williamson hatred. Like, what was? You don't pay attention to it, so you don't really know.
Well, the looks thing is, I'm bald and fat, so that's an easy target.
And the beard. Well, you don't have much beard now, but you used to have a big
long beard. Yeah.
Sort of an intellectual biker kind of look.
Actually, I'm a biker. I like to ride. Yeah. So part of that's just the nature.
Who wants to hang women?
Part of that's just the nature of social media, right? Yeah. So people who don't have unusual looks, like Jonah or Rich or people like that, still get a lot of the same thing. Yeah. And if you're a woman, it's pretty much 100%.
Oh yeah.
So
it's all
if
about
you're Kat Timpf, 99% of what's written or said about you is about your looks.
Yeah.
Probably, which is silly, but that's just kind of the way it is for women. It's probably worse if you're an unattractive woman, I would imagine. So that's just part of the the shallowness of the discourse. and maybe we can close out with this because it's not really discourse, right? It's not actual intellectual exchange.
No.
It's I call it anti-discourse.
Sure.
So it's communication masquerading as discourse. It's actually there to prevent the exchange of ideas. So it's just about exchanging markers of tribal affiliation.
Yeah.
So hate him, love him, love him.
I would say it doesn't even really rise to the level of ad hominem, right? In a way,
No.
it's
People have to know you to
Yeah,
have
exactly.
ad hominem. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of like good things you could make fun of me about and mock me about, and all sorts of insults that would be, open to me, that I would be open to. But yeah, that sort of stuff I don't care very much about.
Yeah.
I did get a guy one time. I was in Las Vegas who saw me from across the room, and he came over, and he was clearly getting ready to scrap. He was mad, and he was coming at me. It was one of those big, Vegas halls, and the closer he got, the smaller he felt, apparently. And and he finally got up there and decided that maybe we would just talk instead. And but you could tell he was just, hopping mad, and he was like, he's talking to his friend like, go get him. So you get a lot of
So you ended up having a civil conversation with
not
him?
really.
Oh.
But there weren't blows exchanged.
Yeah.
And I mean, that has happened from time to time, but not very much.
What do you mean? People have thrown punches at you?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, whoa.
Although that's really rare. So one of my least favorite genres of modern journalism is the...
Wait. You've been physically attacked for your writing?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, physically attacked?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not very often, but yeah.
Can you give us a couple of examples? I'm dying to know. I've never had that honor.
Usually there's alcohol involved.
Well, yeah, but still, that's success right there.
Yeah.
I mean it.
Well, what I was going to say, one of my least favorite genres of modern journalism is the person who says, I'm in public life and someone wrote something nasty and personal about me on the internet, or I got death threats. Because as you probably know, and I knew this when I was a nobody, newspaper editor that was not on Fox News and people didn't really follow. If you are writing in public life, if you're doing commentary, if you're a public figure in any stretch, you get threats, period.
Yep.
Everybody does.
Yep.
If you're the coach of the Dallas Cowboys, if you're a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, if you're on the left, if you're on the right, just suck it up and deal with it. So I get a lot less of this, obviously, than people who are really famous do, people who are really well known do. Sean Hannity probably actually has physical security concerns.
Oh, I'm sure.
That people, actually want to,
of course,
do violence to him.
Yeah.
What I used to do is people would, sort of threaten me on Twitter, and I would just send them the address of where I was at that moment, because I live in Texas, and you're going to get shot.
Good luck.
Right. But
that's a good one.
There's that. So the occasional shove or something like that.
Wow.
When I was living in New York, dating would get weird sometimes, because if you went out with a girl who didn't know you very well,
I bet.
Of course, they Google you first, and then she didn't know that she was on a date, going on a date with a right-wing monster. Yeah. And you'd always tell those dates because, the first thing, it's the opening volley is, let's fight about politics. And my dear friend Jay Nordlinger has a great way of handling these situations. So Jay, as you know, is also a classical music critic. So all of his friends are Upper West Side culture snobs. And they're all left-wing, of course, and they always want to fight with Jay about politics. And Jay will say to them very sweetly, let's not talk about politics. Let's talk about something you know something about.
Oh. Well, Kevin, I just want to say good luck out there.
Oh, thanks.
I hope no one does anything terribly bad to you. I mean, I don't think so.
Most people are nice. Most people... most people who aren't really involved in politics just kind of think it's neat that you're a writer. And they're like, wait, you're published?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, no, I'm not tending bar. I actually, write and make a living doing this, and that kind of stuff. Most people's lives are not so small and sad and twisted that
That's
they get
true.
really upset over these sorts of things.
There are
people who gravitate toward, political Facebook and political Twitter and really angry ideological movements and, marching with tiki torches and that sort of thing. It ain't about politics with them. It's about something else.
Sure. Absolutely.
And, so hopefully they will, their lives will improve. And if they don't, there's nothing I can do for them.
I love your work. I was going to say, even when I disagree with it, actually, I would say, especially when I disagree with it, because it always makes me think.
That's one place.
And it's done well.
That's one place that's kind of lonely for me right now, to be honest.
What?
Is that there aren't a lot of writers on the other side whose work I really enjoy right now.
Oh yeah.
Like
it's rough out there.
Well, there are people there are people who are on the left who write who I enjoy, like some of the writers at the Atlantic, for instance. But they aren't really writing like about left-wing politics.
Right.
So there aren't people at Mother Jones or.
What you want is like Christopher Hitchens before he moved to the right.
Yeah,
because he was a great writer too.
Yeah, I mean,
sort of like you.
You just get these boring, feckless mediocrities like John Chait and Matt Iglesias and people like that who've never written an interesting sentence in their entire careers, never had an interesting thought one time, who are just so utterly conventional and predictable. Paul Krugman's a good example of this. He's a first-rate intellect. I mean, he is by all accounts, including by people who hate his guts, a great economist and a genuinely creative thinker. And his column is like, it should be in the Berkeley School newspaper. It's just, it's puerile. And so I would love to find someone who's on the other side who enrages me, but who has something interesting and arresting to say. But, I read lefty magazines. I read Dissent. I read Mother Jones. I read The Nation. I used to read The New Republic back when it was still really The New Republic and not whatever this thing is that calls itself The New Republic now. But there's so little of interest in any of that anymore. So if anyone has any ideas about who I should be reading, I would be grateful for suggestions.
When Hitchens died, I remember thinking, oh, that's it. That's the end of literary journalism, political journalism. But I mean, I think you're it.
Well, I think we're probably over time, but can I tell you my Hitchens story?
Please.
So I never knew him really, but I did run into him socially one time, which was at Bill Buckley's funeral. And so Hitchens was there at 10 o'clock in the morning, blind drunk, of course, reeking of scotch from across the room. So I had ridden down that morning from Connecticut, where I was living at the time, and weird small world thing. I was sitting next to a guy on the train, we were talking, and he was a construction guy, and he was working on St. Patrick's. And because the ceiling
Cathedral.
It's because the ceiling had problems, and like they're afraid the ceiling is going to start, falling in a little bit. And so Bill's funeral, of course, is at St. Patrick's. And so I'm leaving the church and walking toward each other from opposite sides of the room are Christopher Hitchens, drunk, and Henry Kissinger. Oh my God. And about whom Hitchens wrote an entire book, of course, the indictment of Henry Kissinger. Yeah. And so I thought they're going to meet in the middle, and this church already has a weak ceiling, and it's going to fall down on top of us, and that's going to be the end of us all. And it'll be a great news story for several days, and 90% of the conservative intelligentsia will be taken out, and a good share of the liberal one too, because Bill's funeral was pretty well attended by illustrious people. But they passed one another and didn't even speak, and I was surprised by that. And Hitchens, I didn't see this, but I have it on good authority that he, rotten old atheist that he was, sang all the hymns and all that stuff. So he was a good sport about it, I guess. So the one time I ever saw Christopher Hitchens was in church.
Of course. Well, again, thanks for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I wish you the best, and I really enjoy your work a lot. And I wish there were more of you, especially people who take different positions than mine. So thanks again.
Great.
Cool. This was the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To support the show and become a member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredlisteners.com. To purchase any of the Renegade University video courses, go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses.